In the sleepy village of King's Abbot, a shocking murder shatters the calm. Who stabbed Roger Ackroyd in his locked study? Was it his missing stepson, Ralph hiding dark secrets, or the mysterious parlor maid with a hidden past? Dr. James Shepherd narrates the chilling tale, but can you trust him? Enter Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, unraveling a web of lies, blackmail, and betrayal. A cryptic letter, a rigged dictaphone, and footprints that deceive. Every clue twists the truth. Will you spot the killer before Poirot reveals the jaw-dropping truth? Chapter 1. Whispers in King's Abbot. The village of King's Abbot was not the sort of place where secrets stayed buried for long. Nestled in the green folds of the English countryside, its thatched cottages and winding lanes seemed to hum with a quiet, persistent curiosity. By the summer of 1926, the air was thick with whispers, and I, Dr. James Shepherd, found myself at the heart of them. As the village's only doctor, I was accustomed to hearing confessions of assorted fevers, the occasional guilty murmur about a neighbor's indiscretions, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that was about to break. It began with the death of Mrs. Ferrars. She was a widow, wealthy and shrewd, who lived in a grand house just beyond the churchyard. Her husband, Ashley Ferrars, had died a year prior, and though the coroner had called it a heart attack, the village had other ideas. Poison, they whispered, slipped into his evening brandy by none other than his wife. No one could prove it, of course, but the gossip clung to her like damp fog. When she was found dead in her bed one bright June morning, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. An overdose of Veronal. I certified my pen, scratching out the death certificate with a heaviness I couldn't quite shake. Suicide, I wrote, but the word felt wrong, like a key that didn't fit the lock. My sister, Caroline, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. She couldn't live with the guilt, James, she said over breakfast, her knitting needles clacking like a metronome. Caroline was a spinster of 50, with a mind as sharp as her tongue and a nose for scandal that could rival any bloodhound. Killing her husband like that, and now this. It's no surprise, is it? The woman was haunted. Her eyes gleamed over her teacup, and I knew she was already spinning a tale for the village. I grunted, spreading marmalade on my toast. You've been reading too many novels, Caroline. People don't just poison their husbands and then themselves, without reason. She scoffed, her needles pausing for emphasis. Money, James, or love, or both. Mrs. Ferrars had plenty of the former, and who knows what else she was hiding. You mark my words, there's more to this than meets the eye. I didn't argue. Caroline's theories were often wild, but they had a way of burrowing into your mind. Besides, I had my own patients to attend to: a farmer with a sprained ankle, a child with a cough, and no time to indulge her fantasies. Yet, as I made my rounds that morning, the village seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of unease. At the butcher's, Mr. Hammond muttered about Mrs. Ferrars' shady dealings. At the post office, Miss Gannett hinted at a mysterious visitor seen near her house the night before her death. Even old Mrs. Folliot, who rarely left her cottage, leaned over her garden gate to ask if I'd noticed anything peculiar about the widow's demeanor. By noon, I was weary of it all. King's Abbot thrived on gossip, but this felt different, darker, heavier, as if the village itself were holding its breath. I returned home for lunch, hoping for a reprieve, but Caroline was waiting, her eyes alight with fresh news. You'll never guess who I saw this morning, she said, setting a plate of cold ham before me. Roger Ackroyd himself, looking as pale as a ghost. He was coming out of the chemist's, and I swear, James, he looked like a man who'd seen the devil. I raised an eyebrow. Roger Ackroyd was the wealthiest man in King's Abbot, a widower, who owned Fernley Park, a sprawling estate that dwarfed every other house in the village. He was a man of robust health and hearty spirits, not given to ghostly pallor. Perhaps he's got a cold, I said dryly. Caroline snorted. A cold? No, James, it's more than that. I heard from Mrs. Russell that he was close to Mrs. Ferrars. Close, if you catch my meaning. And now she's dead, and he's walking about like a man with a secret. Don't you think it's odd? I sighed, pushing my plate away. Everything's odd to you, Caroline. The man's allowed to look tired. He's got a business to run, a stepson to manage, and now all this talk about Mrs. Ferrars. Leave it alone. But Caroline was not one to leave things alone, and by evening, her words were gnawing at me. Roger Ackroyd and Mrs. Ferrars, could there be truth to the rumors? They'd been seen together often enough, sharing quiet dinners at Fernley Park or strolling through the village square. Ackroyd was a bluff, genial man, but he had a reputation for charm, and Mrs. Ferrars, for all her sharpness, had a certain allure. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. Gossip was a dangerous thing, and I'd seen it ruin reputations before that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, I received an invitation that would change everything. A note from Fernley Park, written in Ackroyd's bold hand, asking me to dine with him at 8 o'clock, a matter of some urgency. It read, and I felt a prickle of unease. Ackroyd was not a man to use such phrases lightly. I dressed carefully, choosing a sober suit that befitted my role as the village doctor. Fernley Park was a 10-minute walk from my house, past the church, and up the hill where the estate loomed like a sentinel. The house was a grand affair, all red brick and ivy, with tall windows that glowed like eyes in the dusk. As I approached, I noticed the gardens were unusually quiet, no gardeners clipping hedges, no maids airing linens. The air felt still, expectant. Parker, Ackroyd's butler, greeted me at the door. He was a tall, impeccable man with a face like polished marble, betraying nothing. "Good evening, Dr. Shepherd," he said, taking my coat. "Mr. Ackroyd is in the drawing room." The drawing room was warm and richly furnished, with heavy drapes and a fire crackling in the grate. Roger Ackroyd stood by the mantel, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was a broad-shouldered man of 50, with a ruddy face and a mustache that curled at the ends. Tonight, though, his eyes were shadowed and his smile was strained. "James, good of you to come," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I hope I haven't dragged you away from anything important." "Not at all," I replied, settling into the leather armchair. "Your note sounded urgent." He hesitated, swirling his whiskey. "It is, in a way. I've had some disturbing news. I'd like your opinion, as a friend and a doctor." I leaned forward, intrigued despite myself. "What sort of news?" He glanced at the door, as if ensuring we were alone. "It's about Mrs. Ferrers. I received a letter from her, posted before she died. She confessed something to me, James. Something terrible." My heart quickened. "Confessed what?" Ackroyd's jaw tightened. "She admitted to killing her husband, poisoned just as the village suspected. But that's not all. She said someone else knew someone who's been blackmailing her ever since. She didn't name them, but she was afraid, James, afraid for her life." I stared at him, the room suddenly colder despite the fire. "Blackmail. Roger, this is serious. Have you told the police?" "Not yet," he said, his voice low. "I wanted to talk to you first. You knew her, James. Did she ever mention anyone who might have had a hold over her?" I shook my head, my mind racing. "No, nothing. She was private. You know that. What if she was being blackmailed? That could explain." I trailed off, unwilling to say it. "Her suicide," Ackroyd finished grimly. "Or perhaps something worse." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling over us. The fire snapped, and outside, the wind rustled through the trees. I was about to suggest calling Inspector Davis when the telephone rang. Shrill and jarring in the quiet room. Parker appeared, his face as impassive as ever. "A call for you, Dr. Shepherd," he said. I frowned, puzzled. "Who is it?" He wouldn't give his name, sir. Said it was urgent. I excused myself and followed Parker to the hall where the telephone stood on a polished table. I lifted the receiver, my pulse quickening. "Dr. Shepherd speaking." The voice on the other end was low, hurried, almost a whisper. "Come back to Fernley Park at once. Doctor, it's Roger Ackroyd. He's been murdered." The line went dead. Before I could respond, I stood frozen, the receiver heavy in my hand. Murdered. It was impossible. Ackroyd had been alive and well moments ago. I turned to Parker, who was hovering nearby. "Did you hear that? Someone said Mr. Ackroyd's been murdered." Parker's eyes widened, a rare crack in his composure. "Murdered, sir. But he's in the drawing room." We hurried back, my heart pounding. The drawing room was empty, the fire still burning. I called out for Ackroyd, but there was no answer. Parker led me to the study, a smaller room at the back of the house. The door was locked, but through the keyhole, I could see a sliver of light and something else. "Break it down," I said, my voice hoarse. Parker hesitated, then threw his weight against the door. It gave way with a splintering crash and we stumbled inside. There, in the high-backed chair by the desk, sat Roger Ackroyd. His head was slumped forward, and a silver dagger protruded from his neck. Blood pooled on the carpet, dark and glistening, and his eyes stared blankly into the void. I knelt beside him, checking for a pulse, but I knew it was futile. Roger Ackroyd was dead, and the village of King's Abbot would never be the same. The study was a scene of quiet chaos. Papers were scattered on the desk, a glass of whiskey overturned, its contents soaking into the blotter. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the breeze, and footprints marked the muddy ground outside. I stood, my hands trembling, as Parker fetched the police. The letter Ackroyd had mentioned was nowhere to be seen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice on the telephone had known more than they'd let on. Chapter 2. The arrival of Poirot. The village of King's Abbot awoke to a grey dawn, the air heavy with the kind of silence that follows a storm. Roger Ackroyd's murder had shattered the quiet rhythm of our little community, and by morning, the news had spread like wildfire through the narrow lanes and stone-walled cottages. I, Dr. James Shepherd, found myself at the heart of it all. My mind still reeling from the sight of Ackroyd's body slumped in his study, the dagger glinting cruelly in the lamplight. The village buzzed with speculation, and my sister, Caroline, was already at her post by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the street for any hint of new gossip. "James," he said, her voice low but urgent, "they're saying Ralph Peyton's gone missing, banished, and you know what that means. The stepson, of all people. It's always the ones closest, isn't it?" She adjusted her spectacles, her fingers twitching with excitement. Caroline had a knack for turning whispers into full-blown theories, and today she was in her element. I nodded absently, my thoughts elsewhere. Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's stepson, had indeed disappeared, and the timing was damning. He was a handsome young man, charming in his way, but reckless, with a reputation for running up debts and relying on Ackroyd's generosity to bail him out. The police had already searched his rooms at the Three Boars, the local inn, and found nothing but a half-packed suitcase and a pair of muddy shoes. Suspicion hung over him like a storm cloud, and I could feel the weight of it pressing on the village as I sipped my morning tea, trying to shake the image of Ackroyd's lifeless form. There was a knock at the door. It was Flora Ackroyd, Roger's niece and Ralph's fiancée, her face pale but composed, her blue eyes rimmed with red. She wore a simple grey dress, her blonde hair neatly pinned, but there was a tremor in her hands as she clasped them before her. "Dr. Shepherd," she said, her voice steady, despite the strain. "I need your help. I've just come from Fernley Park. The police are crawling all over, asking questions, poking into everything. They think Ralph did it, but I know he didn't. He couldn't have." Her voice cracked and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "I heard about your new neighbor, the detective. They say he's brilliant. I want to ask him to take the case." I hesitated. My neighbor, the peculiar little man who called himself Mr. Poirot, was none other than Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective who had retired to King's Abbot to grow marrows of all things. I'd met him only briefly, over a shed fence as he fussed over his vegetable patch, his mustache twitching with pride at his oversized courgettes. He was an odd figure, small and fastidious, with a penchant for order and a gleam in his eye that suggested he saw more than he let on. Could he be persuaded to step into this mess? "I'll take you to him," I said finally, setting down my cup. Caroline's eyes widened, sensing a fresh wave of intrigue, but I waved her off. "Stay here, Caroline. This is Flora's business." We walked the short distance to Poirot's cottage, a neat little place with a perfectly trimmed hedge, and a row of merrows gleaming in the morning light. Flora was silent, her steps quick and determined, as if she could outpace her fear. When we reached the door I knocked, and after a moment swung open to reveal Poirot himself. He was exactly as I remembered, short, with an egg-shaped head, a meticulously groomed mustache, and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. He wore a pristine suit, despite the early hour, and his polished shoes gleamed as if he'd spent the morning buffing them. "Dr. Shepherd," he exclaimed, his accent crisp and musical. "And who is this charming young lady?" Come, intéressez-vous plot." I introduced Flora, who wasted no time. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice firm now, "my uncle Roger Ackroyd was murdered last night. The police think my fiancé Ralph Peyton is responsible, but I know he's innocent. Please, will you help us? Will you find the truth?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he studied her in silence, his head tilted like a bird assessing its surroundings. Then he smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Mademoiselle, the death of Monsieur Ackroyd is a tragedy, n'est-ce? And you believe in this young man's innocence. Very well. Hercule Poirot does not refuse a plea for justice. I will take the case." Flora's shoulders sagged with relief, and I felt a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension. Poirot gestured for us to sit in his tidy parlor, where a tray of tea and biscuits awaited, as if he'd anticipated company. "But first," he said, raising a finger, "you must tell me everything, every detail, however small. The truth, it hides in the shadows of the insignificant." Flora recounted the events of the previous night, the dinner at Fernley Park, agitation over a letter from Mrs. Ferrars, the mysterious phone call that had summoned me back to the estate, and the grim discovery of Ackroyd's body. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled, his eyes never leaving her face. When she mentioned Ralph's disappearance, his mustache twitched. "And this letter," he said, leaning forward. "What did Monsieur Ackroyd say of it? Be precise, mademoiselle." Flora frowned, recalling he didn't read it aloud, but he said it was from Mrs. Ferrars. He was upset, said it contained something dreadful, something about her past. He was going to tell Dr. Shepherd more, but then the phone call came, and well, you know the rest. Poirot nodded slowly, then turned to me. "And you, mon ami, what is your account of this call? Who was it that summoned you back to Park?" I shifted uncomfortably, the memory of that call still sharp. "It was Parker, the butler. He said Mr. Ackroyd needed me urgently, that something had happened. But when I got there, Parker denied making the call, and then we found Ackroyd dead." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Curio towards curio. A call that was not made, yet you heard it." "We shall see." He stood abruptly, clapping his hands. "Come, we must visit the scene of this crime. The truth, it leaves its footprints, and Hercule Poirot will find them." We made our way to Fernley Park, the grand estate looming under a sky heavy with clouds. The police had cordoned off the study, but Poirot, with a few charming words and a flash of his old credentials, gained us entry. The room was as I'd left it. Ackroyd's body had been removed, but the blood-stained rug remained, and the dagger was gone, taken for evidence. The window stood open, its curtains fluttering, and a chair near the desk seemed slightly out of place, its angle odd against the room's symmetry. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame darting from one corner to another. He examined the window, noting the muddy footprints on the sill, then crouched to study the chair. "This chair," he murmured, "it has been moved. Why? To conceal something, to create an impression." He tapped his temple. The little grey cells. They are working. Flora watched anxiously, her hands twisting her handkerchief. You think those footprints are Ralph's? She asked. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Footprints, mademoiselle, they tell a story, but not always the one we expect. These are deliberate, perhaps. We shall see. He turned to me. Dr. Shepherd, you will be my eyes and ears. You know this village, its people. You will assist Hercule Poirot in this investigation. I agreed, though I felt a flicker of unease. Poirot's gaze was too sharp to knowing, as if he could see through me to something I hadn't yet acknowledged myself. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. I'll do what I can. As we left the study, Poirot paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the room one last time. The truth, he said softly, almost to himself, is in the details. A moved chair, a false phone call, a letter half-read. These are the threads, and we shall weave them into a tapestry of justice. We stepped into the hall, where Parker, the butler, awaited his face, a mask of polite deference. Monsieur Poirot, he said, bowing slightly, the inspector has asked to speak with you. He's in the drawing room. Poirot nodded, but his attention was elsewhere, fixed on a small table near the door. On it sat a silver cigarette case, its surface gleaming in the dim light. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, then opened it to reveal a single cigarette, its tip slightly crushed. Interesting, he murmured, slipping it into his pocket. Very interesting. Flora and I followed him to the drawing room where Inspector Davis, a gruff man with a walrus mustache, was pacing. Mr. Poirot, he said, his tone skeptical, I've heard of you, but this is a straightforward case. Ralph Payton's our man. He's got motive. Ackroyd was cutting him off financially and opportunity. Those footprints match his shoes, and he's fled. What more do you need? Poirot's smile was polite but edged with steel. Inspector, the obvious is rarely the truth. A man does not run because he is guilty. Sometimes he runs because he is afraid. We must ask why Monsieur Peyton is afraid, and who else had reason to wish Monsieur Ackroyd dead. The inspector snorted but waved us toward the household members gathered in the drawing room. There was Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, a thin woman with a pinched face and a habit of clutching her purse as if it might escape. Major Hector Blunt, a quiet, weathered man who seemed more at home on a safari than in a parlor, and Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's secretary, whose easy charm and quick smile masked a nervous energy. Each eyed Poirot warily, as if sensing he could unravel their secrets with a single glance. Poirot began his questions, his voice gentle but relentless. Madame Ackroyd, he said, turning to the sister-in-law, you were at dinner last night. Did Monsieur Ackroyd seem himself? Mrs. Ackroyd sniffed, her fingers tightening on her purse. He was upset, of course. That letter from Mrs. Ferrars had him in a state. He kept muttering about betrayal, but he wouldn't say more. I told him to burn it and be done, but Roger was never one to let things go. And you, Major Blunt? Poirot's eyes flicked to the older man, who stood stiffly by the window. You were a guest at Fernley Park. Did you notice anything unusual? Blunt cleared his throat, his face impassive. Not particularly. Roger was distracted, but that's not uncommon for a man with his responsibilities. I retired early. Didn't see much. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, as if sensing something unspoken, then moved to Geoffrey Raymond. And you, monsieur, as Monsieur Ackroyd's secretary, you knew his affairs. This letter, did you see it? Raymond's smile faltered. No, sir, he mentioned it, but he kept it close, said it was personal. I was in my room working on accounts when it happened. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the parlour-maid, Mademoiselle Ursula Bourne, where is she? Mrs. Ackroyd's lips pursed. That girl, always skulking about, listening at doors. She was in the kitchen, I suppose, though I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. Flora's cheeks flushed. That's unfair. Aunt Cecil, Ursula's been nothing but loyal. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. We shall speak with Mademoiselle Bourne in time. For now, I thank you all. Dr. Shepherd and I have much to consider. As we left the drawing room, Poirot pulled me aside, his voice low. Mon ami, this household is a nest of secrets. Each one hides something of fear, a desire, a lie. We must tread carefully, for the truth is a delicate thing, easily crushed. We stepped outside, and Poirot led me toward the summer house, a small structure tucked in the estate's gardens. He examined the ground, his eyes narrowing at a patch of disturbed earth. Kneeling, he brushed aside leaves to reveal a single goose quill, its tip stained with something dark. He held it up, his smile triumphant. A clue, Dr. Shepherd. Small, yes, but significant. What does it tell us? I shook my head, puzzled. It's just a quill. Perhaps someone was writing out here. Poirot chuckled. Writing, perhaps, or something else entirely. We shall see. He slipped the quill into a small envelope, then stood, dusting off his hands. Now, tell me, mon ami, what do you know of this Ursula Bourne? The village, it talks, does it not? I hesitated, thinking of Caroline's endless chatter. There's talk she's hiding something. My sister says she's too polished for a parlour-maid, as if she's playing a part. But it's just gossip. Gossip, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming, is the shadow of truth. We must follow it to its source. He clapped me on the shoulder. Come, we have work to do. The little grey cells, they demand exercise. The rest of the day was a blur of interviews and observations. Poirot spoke with Parker, who maintained his story about the phone call, his face impassive, but his hands betraying a slight tremor. We visited the Three Boars, where the landlord confirmed Ralph had been there the previous evening but left abruptly, his manner agitated. The muddy shoes, now in police custody, were indeed Ralph's size, but Poirot noted their soles were oddly clean for someone who'd supposedly fled through the muddy estate. By evening, we returned to Poirot's cottage, where he poured me a glass of sherry and sat back, his eyes half closed. This case, he said, it is like a puzzle with pieces that do not fit. The footprints, the chair, the quill, the call, they are all threads, but the pattern is not yet clear. Tell me, Dr. Shepherd, what do you see? I shrugged, feeling out of my depth. It looks bad for Ralph. He had reason to want Ackroyd's money, and he's gone. But Flora's so certain he's innocent. Poirot's smile was almost pitying. Mademoiselle Flora sees with her heart, not her eyes. We must see with both. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. We find this Ralph Peyton, and we ask why he runs. As I walked home under the stars, the village quiet save for the distant bark of a dog, I felt the weight of Poirot's words. The truth was out there, hidden in the details, but it felt slippery, just out of reach. Caroline was waiting, her eyes bright with questions, but I brushed her off and went to bed, the image of that moved chair lingering in my mind. The next morning Poirot was at my door before breakfast, his energy undimmed. Dr. Shepherd, we must return to Fernley Park. There is something I have missed, something small but vital. We arrived to find the household in disarray. Mrs. Ackroyd was wailing about her finances, claiming Roger's death left her destitute. Blunt was nowhere to be seen, and Raymond was pacing, muttering about unfinished business. Flora met us at the door, her face pale but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything to help Ralph? Poirot's expression softened. Mademoiselle, we are close, but we must be patient. The truth, it reveals itself in its own time. He led me back to the study, where he knelt by the chair once more. This chair, he said, almost to himself, it bothers me. It is not where it should be. Why move it? To hide something. To distract. He ran his fingers along the floor, then paused, his eyes lighting up. Aha! Regard as he pointed to a faint scratch on the floorboard, barely visible. Something was dragged here. Something heavy, not the chair, but perhaps something it concealed. He stood, his mind clearly racing. Dr. Shepherd, we must search the grounds again. The summer house, the quill, they are connected. We spent the afternoon combing the estate, Poirot's energy relentless. He examined every corner of the summer house, every blade of grass, until he stopped at a small shed nearby. Inside, hidden under a tarp, was a battered suitcase, its lock broken. Poirot opened it to reveal a jumble of clothes and papers, including a photograph of Ralph and Ursula Bourne, their faces close, their smiles intimate. A secret, Poirot said, holding up the photo. This Mademoiselle Bourne. She knows more than she says, and Monsieur Patney is not what he seems. As we returned to the house, Flora rushed out, her eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, they've found Ralph. He's in Liverpool, hiding. The police are going to arrest him. Poirot's expression was unreadable. Then we must move quickly, Mademoiselle. The truth, it waits for no one. That evening, as the village settled into an uneasy quiet, Poirot sat in his parlor, the goose quill on the table before him. Dr. Shepherd, he said, his voice low. This case, it is not what it seems. The footprints, they are too perfect. The chair, it is a distraction. The quill, it is a message. We are close, mon ami, very close. He leaned back, his eyes gleaming. The truth is in the details, and Hercule Poirot will find it. Tomorrow, we confront the shadows. As I left his cottage, the weight of his words settled over me. The village, the estate, the people, they all seemed different now, as if hiding something just beneath the surface. And Poirot, with his sharp eyes and sharper mind, was pulling back the veil, one detail at a time. Chapter 3. The tangled web of suspects, the morning after Roger Ackroyd's murder. King's Abbot was a cauldron of whispers, each villager stirring their own blend of suspicion and conjecture. The air felt heavier, as if the weight of the crime had settled over the quaint streets, and I, Dr. James Shepherd, found myself at the heart of it all, not merely as a witness but as a reluctant participant in the unraveling drama. My sister, Caroline, had already taken to her role as the village's unofficial chronicler, her sharp tongue weaving tales from fragments of overheard conversations. She sat at our breakfast table, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal, as she recounted the latest rumors about Ackroyd's death. James, she said, her voice low but insistent, they're saying Ralph Peyton's run off, vanished. And you know what that means, guilt, plain as day. Why else would he disappear the very night his stepfather is stabbed? She leaned forward, her toast forgotten, as if I might confirm her theory on the spot. I stirred my tea, the clink of the spoon against the cup a small anchor in the storm of her words. Carolyn, people vanish for all sorts of reasons. Fear, not guilt, often drives them. My tone was measured, but inside I felt a prickle of unease. Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's stepson, was indeed missing, and his absence cast a long shadow over Fernley Park. I'd seen him only days before, his handsome face clouded with some unspoken worry, but I hadn't pressed him. Now, I wished I had. The village was alive with speculation, and by noon I found myself summoned to Fernley Park by Flora Ackroyd, Ralph's fiancée and Roger's niece. She was waiting in the drawing room, her delicate features drawn tight with anxiety. Her golden hair was pinned neatly, but her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her distress. "Dr. Shepherd," she began, her voice trembling, "you must help me. Ralph didn't do this. I know he didn't. He loved Roger, even if they quarreled. Please, you know that funny little man next door, Mr. Poirot? Is it they say he's some sort of detective? Could you bring him here?" I hesitated. My new neighbor, the peculiar Mr. Poirot, was none other than Hercule Poirot, the famed Belgian detective who had retired to our village to, of all things, grow mad. I'd met him only briefly. His small stature and fastidious manner almost comical against the backdrop of King's Abbot's rustic simplicity. Yet there was a sharpness in his eyes, a glint that suggested his retirement was more a pause than an end. "I'll speak to him," I promised Flora, though I wondered what a man like Poirot would make of our village's tragedy. An hour later, I stood in Poirot's immaculate garden where rows of marrows grew with military precision. He was bent over a plant, inspecting it with the same intensity one might reserve for a crime scene. "Monsieur Shepherd," he greeted, straightening with a slight bow, "you come not to admire my marrows, I think." His accent was thick, his mustache impeccably waxed, and his green eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. I explained the situation: Ackroyd's murder, Ralph's disappearance, Flora's plea. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled before him. "A murder, you say, in this quiet place. 'Tis interesting. The human heart, it does not retire, even in King's Abbot. I will come." He paused, then added, "And you, my friend, you will assist me. You are the doctor, the man who sees all, hears all, in this village." I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or unnerved by his request, but I agreed. We returned to Fernley Park, where Poirot's presence seemed to shift the air in the room. Flora greeted him with a mix of hope and desperation, while the household gathered, each member a thread in the tangled web of suspects. There was Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, her pinched face betraying her constant worry over money. Major Hector Blunt, a reserved big-game hunter and guest at Fernley Park, whose silence seemed to hide more than it revealed. Geoffrey Raymond, charming young secretary, whose easy smile didn't quite reach his eyes. And Parker, the butler, whose stiff professionalism masked a nervous edge. Poirot began with the crime scene. The study where Ackroyd had been found, a dagger plunged into his neck. The room was as it had been the night before, save for the absence of the body. The heavy oak desk, the leather chair, the open window letting in a faint breeze seemed frozen in time. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his small hands darting here and there, examining details I hadn't noticed. "This chair," he murmured, pointing to an armchair slightly askew near the desk. "It has been moved, has it not?" "Not much, but enough." "Why, I wonder?" I frowned, trying to recall the room's usual arrangement. "It might have been bumped during the struggle," I suggested, but Poirot shook his head. "No struggle, Monsieur Shepherd. The wound, it was precise. Swift, the killer. He was known to Ackroyd, trusted. No struggle, only betrayal." His words hung in the air, and I felt a chill, though the room was warm. He moved to the window, noting the footprints in the soft earth outside. "And these tracks leading to the window, yes, but do they return? We shall see." The interviews began shortly after. Each household member called to the drawing room. Mrs. Ackroyd was first, her voice sharp with indignation as she recounted her financial dependence on Roger. "He was generous, but oh so controlling," she said, her hands fluttering, always holding the purse strings, making me beg for every penny. "And now, with him gone," she trailed off, her eyes darting to Flora, who sat pale and silent. Poirot's questions were gentle but relentless. "Madame, where were you at?" 9:30 last night, when Monsieur Ackroyd was last seen alive." Mrs. Ackroyd bristled. "In my room, of course. I retire early. Parker can confirm I didn't leave." Her tone dared contradiction, but Poirot merely nodded, his expression unreadable. Next was Major Blunt, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as he entered. He spoke little, his answers clipped, but his gaze lingered on Flora, a softness there that vanished when Poirot pressed him about his movements. "I was in the billiard room, alone," he said, "heard nothing, saw nothing." Yet his fingers tightened on the armrest, betraying some inner tension. Geoffrey Raymond was more forthcoming, his charm almost disarming. "I was in my office, catching up on correspondence," he said smoothly. "Roger had me working late most nights. I heard the telephone ring around 9, but I didn't think much of it." Poirot's eyes narrowed at the mention of the phone, but he said nothing, only jotting a note in his small black book. Parker, the butler, was last, his deference polished to a fault. He confirmed Mrs. Ackroyd's alibi but admitted to hearing voices in the study around 9:30, though he couldn't make out the words. "Mr. Ackroyd was alive when I brought his coffee," he said. "I left him at 9:20 and that was that." Poirot asked about the mysterious phone call I'd received, summoning me back to Fernley Park, but Parker denied making it. His face paled. As the interviews ended, Caroline's voice echoed in my mind, her latest tidbit delivered just before I'd left for Fernley Park. "That parlour-maid Ursula Bourne," she'd said, her eyes alight. "There's something odd about her. She's been seen sneaking about, meeting someone in the village. A lover, perhaps, or something more sinister." I mentioned this to Poirot, who raised an eyebrow but made no comment, instead turning his attention to the summer house in the garden. We walked the gravel path to the small structure, its windows glinting in the afternoon sun. Inside, sharp eyes caught something on the floor, a goose quill, its tip stained faintly with ink. He held it up, turning it in the light. "Curio," he murmured. "A quill, but no paper, no ink bottle. What story does this tell, I wonder?" He tucked it into his pocket, his face alight with that peculiar intensity that made me feel he saw more than the rest of us combined. As we returned to the house, Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on me. "Monsieur Shepherd, you are a man of observation. Are you not? You see the patients, their secrets, their fears. Tell me, what do you make of this tangle of suspects?" I hesitated, the weight of his scrutiny unsettling. "They all have secrets," I said at last. "Mrs. Ackroyd's desperate for money, Blunt's hiding something, maybe feelings for Flora, Raymond's too smooth, and Parker, well, he's nervous. As for Ursula Bourne, Caroline's probably right. There's more to her than meets the eye." Poirot smiled, a small enigmatic curve of his lips. "Very good, mon ami, but you must think with little grey cells. Not just the eyes and ears. The truth, it hides in the spaces between what is said and what is not." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt both friendly and probing. "Come, let us see what else this house reveals." The rest of the day passed in a blur of questions and clues, each interaction adding to the web of suspicion. Flora, desperate to clear Ralph's name, confided that he'd been distant lately, worried about money and his future with Ackroyd's business. "He wouldn't kill Roger," she insisted, her voice breaking. "He was going to ask for a loan, not this." But her certainty wavered when Poirot mentioned the footprints, their size matching Ralph's boots. Mrs. Ackroyd, meanwhile, cornered me in the hall, her voice a hissed whisper. "Dr. Shepherd, you're a sensible man. That foreigner, Mr. Poirot, he's stirring things up, asking questions that don't need answering. Can't you make him stop?" Her fear was palpable, but whether it was for herself or someone else, I couldn't tell. By evening, Poirot and I sat in the drawing room, the household dispersed to their rooms. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the armrest. "This case, it is like a tapestry," he said at last. "Each thread, Miss Ackroyd's debts, Blunt's silence, Raymond's charm, the parlour-maid's secrets, leads to the center, to the truth, but we must pull carefully, lest the whole thing unravels too soon." I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere, replaying the night of the murder. The phone call, the dash back to Fernley Park, the sight of Ackroyd's body, it all felt like a dream, yet every detail was etched in my memory. Poirot's voice broke through my thoughts. "Monsieur Shepherd, you were close to Ackroyd. Did he ever speak of enemies, of fears?" I shook my head. He was a powerful man, but well-liked. Mostly, he mentioned the letter from Mrs. Ferrars, though said it troubled him. Something about a secret she'd kept. I stopped, realizing I'd said more than I intended. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but he didn't press. Instead, rising to leave, as we stepped into the cool night air, he turned to me, his voice low. "Tomorrow, we dig deeper. The goose quill, the moved chair, the footprints, they are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. Think, my friend, with the little grey cells. The truth is there, waiting." He smiled, a challenge, in his eyes, and walked off toward his cottage, leaving me with a sense of unease I couldn't shake. The village slept, but I knew I wouldn't. The web of suspects was tightening, and I felt caught in its strands, unsure whether I was observer or prey. Poirot's words echoed in my mind, urging me to see what lay hidden, but the truth felt slippery, just out of reach. As I walked home, Caroline's light still burned in the window, a beacon of gossip and suspicion. Tomorrow, I knew, the tangle, that would only grow more complex. The next day dawned grey and heavy, the clouds mirroring the mood at Fernley Park. Poirot was already there when I arrived, his energy undimmed by the late hour we'd kept. He was in the study again, examining the chair with a magnifying glass, his lips pursed in concentration. "This chair," he said without looking up, "it tells a story. It was moved not by accident but with purpose. To hide something perhaps, or to reveal it." I watched him, fascinated despite myself. "What could a chair hide?" I asked, half expecting one of his cryptic replies. He straightened, his eyes bright. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. A chair out of place is like a word out of context. It changes the meaning of everything." He moved to the desk, running his fingers along its edge, then paused at the telephone. And this call you received, tell me again. What did the voice say? I recounted the moment, the urgency in the voice. Parkus. I'd thought summoning me back to Fernley Park. But Parker denies it, I added, frowning. And no one else was in the house, except the household. Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. A voice can be mimicked, or perhaps recorded. We shall see. His words sent a shiver through me, though I couldn't say why. The idea of a recorded voice, a trick to lure me back, was unsettling. But I pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. We moved to the garden where Poirot examined the footprints again, this time with a measuring tape. These tracks, he said, they are deep, deliberate. Someone wished to be seen, to leave a trail, but why? He glanced at me, his gaze piercing. You were here, Monsieur Shepherd, that night. Did you see anyone near the window? I shook my head, my throat dry. It was dark. I was focused on Ackroyd, on getting to him. The memory of that night was vivid, the crunch of gravel, the cold air, the dread in my chest as I approached the study. Poirot didn't reply. Instead, leading me to the summer-house again, he knelt by the spot where he'd found the goose quill, his fingers brushing the floor. This quill, he said, it is not here by chance. It is a message perhaps, or a mistake. But whose? He stood, dusting his hands, and fixed me with a look that felt like a spotlight. You are a doctor, Monsieur Shepherd. You deal in facts, in evidence. What does this quill say to you? I fumbled for an answer, my mind racing. It's unusual, out of place, like the chair. Maybe someone dropped it, someone who shouldn't have been there, Poirot exclaimed, his voice almost gleeful. Out of place, out of context. The truth lies in these small discords. We must find the melody they disrupt. He clapped his hands, the sound sharp in the quiet garden. Come, we have more to learn. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of interviews and observations. Poirot spoke to Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid, who was pale and tight-lipped, her eyes darting nervously. I was in my room, she insisted when asked about her whereabouts. I heard nothing, saw nothing, but her hands trembled, and Poirot's gentle probing only made her more guarded. Caroline, ever the sleuth, cornered me that evening with fresh gossip. That Ursula, she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. She's hiding something. James, I saw her in the village last week, talking to a man, a stranger, not from King's Abbot, and now Ralph's gone, and she's acting like a ghost. There's a connection, mark my words. I relayed this to Poirot, who nodded thoughtfully. A stranger, you say, in a parlour-maid who is not what she seems. Terse, interesting. He made another note in his book, his pen moving with quick, precise strokes. We must watch Mademoiselle Bourne. She is a thread that may lead us to the center of the web. As night fell, Poirot and I sat once more in the drawing-room, the house quiet around us. The suspects, Mrs. Ackroyd, Blunt, Raymond, Parker, Ursula, swirled in my mind, each with their secrets, their motives. Poirot's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. This case, it is not simple. It is a game of shadows, of half-truths. But the little grey cells, they do not rest. They see what the eyes cannot. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. And you, Monsieur Shepherd, you are my eyes in this village. You know its pulse, its secrets. Tell me, what do you feel, deep in your heart, about this murder? I hesitated, the weight of his question pressing on me. I feel like we're missing something obvious, right in front of us. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. Poirot smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. Good. To feel the absence of truth is the first step to finding it. Tomorrow we follow the threads, the quill, the chair, the footprints, and perhaps, mon ami, we will find what lies hidden. As I walked home, the village silent under a blanket of stars, his words stayed with me. The goose quill, the moved chair, the footprints, they were clues, yes, but also warnings. The truth was close, closer than I dared admit, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Poirot's little grey cells were already piecing it together while I stumbled in the dark. The days that followed were a blur of questions, each answer adding to the tangle. Mrs. Ackroyd's financial woes grew clearer. She'd borrowed heavily from Roger, her resentment barely concealed. Blunt's silence took on a new shade when Flora mentioned his quiet kindness, his unspoken devotion to her. Raymond's charm faltered under Poirot's scrutiny, his alibi less certain with each retelling. And Ursula, the elusive, seemed to vanish into the background, her presence a whisper of suspicion. Caroline, of course, had her own theories, each more elaborate than the last. It's the money, James, she said one evening, her knitting needles clicking furiously. Roger was rich, and someone wanted that wealth. Or maybe it's love, Flora and Ralph, or even that Blunt fellow. Love and money, they're the roots of all evil, you know. I smiled, though her words struck closer than I liked. Money and love both were woven through Fernley Park, binding the suspects in a knot I couldn't untangle. Poirot, however, seemed undaunted, his confidence almost infuriating. The little grey cells, they work, he'd say, tapping his temple. They see the pattern, even when the eyes do not. One afternoon, as we walked the grounds of Fernley Park, Poirot stopped by the summer-house again, his eyes fixed on the spot where the quill had been. This place, he said, it is important, not for what it is, but for what it hides. He knelt, examining the floorboards, then rose with a small, satisfied nod. We are close, Monsieur Shepherd, very close. I wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression stopped me, a mix of certainty and secrecy that made my stomach twist. Instead, I followed him back to the house where Flora waited, her face pale with hope. Have you found anything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching. Mademoiselle, I have found many things, but the truth, it is like a shy bird, it must be coaxed, not chased. Be patient. His words were kind, but there was a steel beneath them, a promise that the answers were coming, whether we were ready or not. As the week drew to a close, the village buzzed with new rumors. Ralph sighted in London, then Liverpool. A stranger seen near Fernley Park the night of the murder. Ursula Bourne's sudden absence from her duties. Each piece felt like a fragment of a larger picture, but the shape of it eluded me. Poirot, however, seemed to thrive on the chaos, his mind a machine sorting through the noise. On the 7th day, he called me to his cottage, where he sat with a cup of tisane, his eyes bright with purpose. Monsieur Shepherd, he said, we are at a turning point. The threads, they converge. The quill, the chair, the footprints, they point to one truth, one killer. But we must be sure. Tomorrow we return to Fernley Park, and we will see what the little grey cells have woven. Chapter 4. The Missing Letter D.R. Shepherd sat in his study, the faint glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on him, each moment replaying in his mind like a phonograph stuck on a single, jarring note. The village of King's Abbot, once a sleepy haven of routine and familiarity, now thrummed with an undercurrent of unease. Roger Ackroyd's murder had shattered the illusion of tranquility, and every whispered conversation in the village square seemed to carry the weight of suspicion. Shepherd's pen hovered over his notebook, the blank page, a silent accusation. He was meant to record his observations, to assist Hercule Poirot in unraveling the tangled knot of the case. But his thoughts kept drifting to that night, the dinner, the letter, the phone call, and the cold reality of Ackroyd's body slumped in his study chair. The letter, it was the pivot around which everything seemed to turn. Ackroyd had mentioned it during their dinner at Fernley Park, his voice low and troubled, as though the words themselves were a burden he could scarcely bear. Shepherd, he had said, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting an eavesdropper. Mrs. Ferris wrote me something. Something I can't quite bring myself to believe. He hadn't elaborated further, not then. The conversation had shifted to mundane matters, business, the weather, the state of the village cricket team, but the shadow of that letter lingered. Shepherd had sensed its importance even before the blade found Ackroyd's neck. Now, with Poirot's sharp gaze fixed on every detail, the letter had become the linchpin of the investigation, a missing piece that promised to unlock the truth. The morning after the murder, Shepherd found himself at Fernley Park once more, summoned by the little Belgian detective stood in the study where Ackroyd had died, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the room with an almost theatrical intensity. The study itself was a picture of understated wealth, mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a heavy oak desk cluttered with papers, and the chair where Ackroyd's body had been found, now pushed slightly askew, as though it, too, bore the weight of the crime. Poirot's eyes lingered on that chair, but he said nothing about it for now. Instead, he turned to Shepherd, his voice crisp and precise. Mon ami, Poirot began, his green eyes glinting with a quiet intensity. We must speak of the letter. It is, I think, the heart of this affair. Tell me everything you recall of what Monsieur Ackroyd said about it. Shepherd shifted uncomfortably, his collar suddenly tight. He recounted the dinner conversation as best he could, choosing his words with care. He was upset, Shepherd said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. He said Mrs. Ferris had written to him, revealing something about a blackmailer, someone who knew her secret about her husband's death, I presume. He didn't read the whole letter to me, only mentioned that it troubled him deeply. He was going to read it again after I left. Poirot's head tilted slightly, like a bird sizing up its prey. And you did not see this letter? You did not, perhaps, glimpse its contents? No, Shepherd replied, perhaps a touch too quickly. He put it away before I left. Said he needed to think it over alone. Poirot nodded, but his eyes never left Shepherd's face. And yet, when you returned to Fernley Park after the mysterious telephone call, the letter was gone. Is this not so? Shepherd nodded, his throat dry. Yes, the police searched the study. They found nothing. Curious, Poirot murmured, pacing slowly around the desk. A letter of such importance, vanished. Stolen, perhaps, by the murderer, or destroyed. But why? To hide its contents, of course. And what contents might those be? Doctor, a name, a confession, a clue to the identity of this blackmailer. Shepherd shrugged, forcing a casual air. I wouldn't know. He didn't share enough for me to guess. Poirot's smile was thin, almost imperceptible. You are a man of precision, Doctor. A medical man, accustomed to observing details. And yet, you tell me so little. I wonder. He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window, where the curtains hung heavy and still, framing the view of the manicured lawn beyond. The investigation moved forward with a relentless rhythm, each interview peeling back another layer of the household's secrets. Poirot insisted on speaking to Parker, the butler, whose stiff demeanor and polished efficiency seemed unshaken by the murder. The man stood ramrod straight in the drawing room, his hands clasped behind him, answering Poirot's questions with a calm that bordered on mechanical. "You were in the house the entire evening, Monsieur Parker?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Yes, sir," Parker replied. "I was attending to my duties. After serving dinner, I retired to the pantry until I heard the doctor return, following the telephone call." "And this call pressed. You are certain you did not make it? Nor did you hear the telephone ring at Fernley Park?" Parker's face remained impassive. "No, sir, I made no call, and I heard no such ring. The first I knew of any trouble was when Dr. Shepherd, they'd arrived, and we discovered Mr. Ackroyd dead." Shepherd felt a prickle of unease as Poirot's eyes flicked toward him, just for a moment, before returning to Parker. "And the letter," Poirot continued, "the one Monsieur Ackroyd was reading that evening. Did you see it? Perhaps on his desk or in his hand?" Parker shook his head. "I saw no letter, sir. Mr. Ackroyd was alone in the study when I last saw him. He gave no indication of anything amiss." Poirot thanked the butler and dismissed him, but his expression remained troubled. As Parker left, Shepherd caught a fleeting glance from the man, neutral, unreadable, yet somehow unsettling. Was it suspicion, or merely the strain of the moment? Shepherd pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Poirot, who had begun pacing, again muttering to himself in French. The letter, Poirot said, almost to himself. "It is the key, but it is missing. And the telephone call, another mystery. Someone wished for you to return, doctor, to discover the body. Why? To ensure the murder was found quickly, or to place you at the scene." Shepherd's heart gave a lurch, but he kept his face composed. "I don't know what you mean, Poirot. I got the call. I came back, and I found him dead. That's all there is to it." Poirot stopped pacing and turned to face him, his eyes sharp as a scalpel. "Is it, mon ami? Is it truly all?" "I think not. There is something you do not tell me, something you hold back. But no matter, Hercule Poirot, he will find it." The day wore on, and Poirot's inquiries grew more meticulous. He insisted on reenacting the events of the murder night, gathering the household in the study to retrace their movements. Flora Ackroyd, pale but resolute, recounted her brief conversation with her uncle before dinner, insisting he had seemed preoccupied but not alarmed. Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, her voice sharp with indignation, complained about the intrusion of the police and Poirot's endless questions, though her eyes darted nervously when the letter was mentioned. Major Blunt, as taciturn as ever, offered little beyond a curt confirmation that he had been in the billiard room most of the evening. Geoffrey Raymond, the secretary, was more forthcoming, admitting he had overheard Ackroyd mention the letter but hadn't seen it himself. "It's all so dreadful," Raymond said, his boyish charm dimmed by the strain of the past days. "Mr. Ackroyd was a good man. You know, whoever did this, it's monstrous." Poirot nodded sympathetically, but his eyes were cold, analytical. "And you, Monsieur Raymond, where were you after dinner?" "Precisely, if you please." Raymond hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "I was in my room, going over some accounts. Mr. Ackroyd had asked me to review the estate's finances. I didn't leave until I heard the commotion when Dr. Shepherd returned." "Accounts," Poirot repeated, as if tasting the word. "And these accounts, they kept you occupied the entire time?" "Yes," Raymond said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I mean, I may have stepped out for a moment, but nothing significant." Poirot let the moment hang, then turned to Shepherd. "And you, doctor, let us walk through your evening once more. You left Fernley Park after dinner?" "Yes, at what time?" "About 9, Shepherd said, his voice steady despite the sweat prickling at the back of his neck. "I walked home, and then, maybe half an hour later, I got the call. It was so I thought, saying Ackroyd needed me urgently. I came back, and well, you know the rest." Poirot's smile was almost pitying. "Do I, doctor? I wonder." The reenactment yielded a troubling discovery, a discrepancy in the timeline. According to Parker, he had been in the pantry at the time of the supposed phone call, and no one else in the household admitted to making it. Yet the call had come, luring Shepherd back to Fernley Park at precisely the right moment to discover the body. Poirot's questions grew sharper, his focus narrowing on the mechanics of the evening. He examined the telephone in the hall, noting its position and the lack of fingerprints, a detail the police had overlooked. He questioned the household staff about visitors, deliveries, anything that might explain an outsider's presence, but no one recalled anything unusual. Then came the dictaphone. Shepherd had been carrying his black medical bag when he returned to Fernley Park, a habit so ingrained he hadn't thought twice about it. Poirot, however, noticed everything. He asked to see the bag, his fingers tracing its worn leather with a reverence that made Shepherd's stomach twist. Inside, among the stethoscope and bandages, Poirot found a small dictaphone, a device Shepherd used occasionally to record patient notes. "This," Poirot said, holding it up like a trophy, "is most interesting. You carry such a device, doctor, for your work, no doubt." "Yes," Shepherd said, his voice tight. It's useful for keeping track of consultations." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "And it is a curious thing, is it not, that a dictaphone might record a voice, or play one back, perhaps even at a specific time, to create the illusion of life where there is none?" Shepherd felt the room tilt, but he forced a laugh. "You're reaching, Poirot. It's just a tool. I wasn't recording anything that night." "Perhaps not," Poirot said, his tone light but his eyes unyielding. "But we shall see, Doctor. We shall see." The investigation took a new turn when Caroline, Shepherd's ever-curious sister, burst into the house that afternoon, her eyes alight with the thrill of gossip. "James," she said, barely pausing for breath, "I've heard the most extraordinary thing they're saying in the village, that Mrs. Ferrars was being blackmailed. Can you imagine? Someone knew about her husband's death, and they were bleeding her dry, and now they think it's tied to poor Mr. Ackroyd's murder." Shepherd's heart thudded, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's just village talk, Caroline. You know how people love a scandal, but it makes sense, doesn't it?" she pressed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That letter he was reading, it must have named the blackmailer. Why else would someone kill him?" Poirot, who had been listening quietly from the corner, stepped forward. "Mademoiselle Caroline, you have the mind of a detective. I think this blackmail, it is a motive most compelling, but we must find the letter to know the truth." Caroline beamed, oblivious to the storm brewing in Shepherd's mind. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, you're too kind, but I'll keep my ears open. You can be sure of that." As the day drew to a close, Poirot and Shepherd walked the grounds of Fernley Park, the air cool and heavy with the scent of damp grass. Poirot was silent for a long time, his steps measured, his hands clasped behind his back. Finally he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Dr. Shepherd," he said, "you are a man of many talents, a physician, a confidant, a chronicler of this tragedy, but I must warn you, where the truth you hide, the little grey cells, they do not rest. They see what is not said, what is not shown, and they will find the answers no matter how deeply they are buried." Shepherd's mouth went dry, but he managed a nod. "I've nothing to hide, Poirot. I'm here to help." Poirot's smile was enigmatic, almost sad. "I hope so, mon ami. I truly hope so." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Fernley Park in a twilight glow. Shepherd felt the weight of Poirot's words settle over him, as heavy as the shadows lengthening across the lawn. The letter was gone. The dictaphone was a question mark, and the phone call remained a mystery. But Poirot was closing in, his mind a relentless machine, picking apart the seams of the story Shepherd had so carefully stitched together. The truth, whatever it was, felt closer than ever and more dangerous. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, theories, and Poirot's relentless probing. The household at Fernley Park remained on edge, each member grappling with their own fears and secrets. Flora Ackroyd, still clinging to her belief in Ralph's innocence, grew more withdrawn, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd's complaints grew sharper, her thriftiness now tinged with paranoia as she questioned the loyalty of the staff. Major Blunt kept to himself, his silence a fortress, while Geoffrey Raymond's charm seemed to fray at the edges, his answers growing vaguer with each of Poirot's questions. Poirot, for his part, was tireless. He examined every inch of the study, measuring distances, testing angles, even crawling on the floor to inspect the rug for traces of dust or footprints. He questioned the gardener about the state of the lawn, the maid about the linens, the cook about the dinner menu, details that seemed trivial but, to Poirot, were threads in a larger tapestry. Shepherd watched it all with a growing sense of dread, his role as Poirot's assistant feeling more like a leash with each passing hour. One afternoon, Poirot called Shepherd to the summer house, a small structure nestled in the gardens of Fernley Park. The air inside was musty, the windows clouded with grime. Poirot stood by a table holding a small object in his gloved hand, a goose quill, its tip stained with what looked like ink. "An odd thing to find, is it not?" Poirot said, turning the quill in the light. "In a summer house where no one writes letters, and yet, here it is, discarded like a secret." Shepherd's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Could be nothing. Maybe one of the staff dropped it." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone maddeningly neutral, "but I think not. This quill, it tells a story of someone who was here, perhaps in haste, perhaps in fear. And I wonder, Doctor, if that someone was connected to the letter we cannot find." Shepherd forced a smile. "You see stories in everything, Poirot." "And you," Dr. Poirot replied, his eyes locking onto Shepherd's, "you see only what you wish to see." The quill was bagged and set aside, another piece in growing collection of clues. Shepherd tried to dismiss it, to focus on the practicalities of the case, but the weight of Poirot's scrutiny was inescapable. Every question, every glance, felt like a scalpel slicing closer to the truth, and the truth, Shepherd knew, was a dangerous thing. That evening, back at his own home, Shepherd sat alone in his study, the dictaphone resting on his desk like a silent accuser. He hadn't used it since the night of the murder, hadn't dared to touch it. But Poirot's discovery had shaken him, planting seeds of doubt where there had been certainty. Had he been careless? Had he left some trace, some clue that Poirot's infernal little grey cells would seize upon? He replayed the night in his mind, step by step, searching for a flaw in his plan. The phone call, the dictaphone, the letter, all carefully orchestrated, all designed to point suspicion elsewhere. But Poirot was no ordinary detective. He saw through the cracks, through the lies, through the carefully constructed facade. Caroline's voice broke through his thoughts, calling from the kitchen. "James, are you still working? You'll wear yourself out with all this detective nonsense. Leave it to Mr. Poirot, he seems to know what he's doing." Shepard managed a weak laugh. "You're right, Caroline, I'll leave it to him." But as he closed his notebook and turned off the lamp, the darkness seemed to press in around him, heavy with the weight of secrets. The letter was gone, but its shadow remained, and Poirot was circling closer with every step. The truth, whatever it was, would not stay hidden forever. The investigation stretched into the next week, each day bringing new questions and fewer answers. Poirot's focus on the letter intensified, his inquiries circling back to it with maddening persistence. He questioned the postman about deliveries to Fernley Park, the stationer about the type of paper Ackroyd favored, even the village telegraph operator about any unusual messages. Nothing emerged, but Poirot's confidence never wavered. One morning, he called Shepard to the police station, where Inspector Raglan, a gruff man with little patience for Poirot's theatrics, was reviewing the case notes. Raglan's frustration was palpable, his desk littered with reports and photographs of the crime scene. "This letter business is a dead end," he said, tossing a file aside. "We've searched every inch of that house. If it existed, it's gone, burned, torn up, who knows?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Inspector, the letter exists, or it did, and its absence is as telling as its presence would be. We must ask ourselves, who benefits from its disappearance? Who had the opportunity to take it?" Raglan snorted. "You're saying the murderer took it? Fine, but that could be anyone in that house or outside it. We've got no prints, no witnesses, nothing solid." Poirot's smile was infuriatingly serene. Nothing solid, perhaps, but many things suggestive. The dictaphone, for example, a curious device to find in the doctor's bag. Nan Shepard's stomach lurched, but he kept his face impassive. "I've told you, Poirot, it's for my work, nothing more." "Of course," Poirot said, his tone light but his eyes piercing. "And yet, I cannot help but wonder. A dictaphone, a missing letter, a telephone call that no one admits to making. These are not coincidences, Doctor. They are pieces of a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot, will fit them together." Raglan rolled his eyes, but Shepard felt the room close in around him. The dictaphone was a loose thread, one he hadn't anticipated. He had been so careful, so precise, but Poirot's mind was like a trap, snapping shut on the smallest inconsistency. Shepard needed to stay ahead, to keep his story straight, to ensure no crack appeared in the facade. As they left the station, Poirot paused on the steps, his gaze distant. "Doctor," he said softly, "you are a man of science. Yes, you understand cause and effect. Every action leaves a trace, every lie casts a shadow, and I see the shadows, mon ami, I see them very clearly." Shepard forced a smile, his heart pounding. "You're a poet, Poirot, but I'm just a doctor trying to help." Chapter 5. Footprints and Falsehoods. The morning after Poirot's unsettling focus on the mysterious letter, the village of King's Abbot seemed to hold its breath, as if the very air was thick with suspicion. Dr. James Shepard, ever the diligent, the narrator, began his account of the day with a meticulous description of the village's mood. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths, and the usual chatter of the market square was subdued, replaced by hushed whispers about Roger Ackroyd's murder. The villagers, Shepard noted, were divided. Some believed Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's missing stepson, was the culprit, while others, swayed by Caroline's relentless gossip, suspected a stranger lurking in the shadows of Fernley Park. Shepard's own unease was palpable as he recounted his morning walk to the Three Boars Inn, where Ralph Peyton was last seen. The inn, a quaint establishment with ivy-clad walls and a creaking sign, stood at the edge of the village, its windows reflecting the pale light of dawn. Shepard's purpose was twofold: to gather any lingering gossip from the innkeeper and to steady his nerves after Poirot's cryptic warning to beware the truth you hide. The words had lingered in his mind like an unwelcome guest, and as he stepped into the inn's dimly lit parlor, he felt the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. The innkeeper, a stout man named Mr. Hodges, greeted Shepard with a nod, his eyes betraying a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Dr. Shepard," he said, wiping a glass with a cloth. "The village is all aflutter about young Ralph. They say he's run off, guilty as sin." Shepard, maintaining his composure, inquired about Ralph's last visit. Hodges recounted how Ralph had arrived 2 nights before the murder, looking agitated, his boots caked with mud. "He didn't stay long," Hodges said, "but he left a pair of shoes in his room, fine leather ones, too. Odd thing, though, they were gone the next morning." This detail piqued Shepard's interest, though he masked it with a casual smile. He thanked Hodges and stepped outside, his mind racing. Ralph's shoes, now missing, were a critical clue, especially since Poirot had already noted footprints leading to the open window in Ackroyd's study. As Shepard walked back toward Fernley Park, He couldn't shake the feeling that poor little grey cells were already piecing together a puzzle he himself was only beginning to see. At Fernley Park, Poirot was waiting, his small frame immaculate in a neatly pressed suit, his moustache perfectly waxed despite the early hour. He stood by the garden gate, examining a patch of earth with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. "Bonjour, my friend," Poirot greeted, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "You have been to the Three Boars. What do you find?" Shepherd recounted Hodge's story about the missing shoes, expecting Poirot to nod approvingly. Instead, Poirot's expression darkened. "The shoes, they are important," he said, "but not for the reason you think. Come, we must speak with Mademoiselle Flora." Flora Ackroyd, pale and drawn, met them in the drawing-room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her engagement to Ralph Peyton had been a source of joy, but now it was a chain binding her to suspicion. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "Ralph didn't do this. He loved Roger. He would never—" Her words trailed off, and tears welled in her eyes. Poirot, with a gentleness that belied his sharp intellect, patted her hand. "Mademoiselle, I believe you, but we must find Ralph to prove it. Tell me, where might he go?" Flora hesitated, then admitted she had received a cryptic note from Ralph the day before, urging her to trust him and not to search for him. "He said he was safe," she whispered, "but he wouldn't say where." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and he asked to see the note. Flora produced a scrap of paper with hurried handwriting, postmarked from Liverpool. "Liverpool," he mused, tapping his chin. "A port city, a place to hide or to flee, we shall see." Shepherd, listening intently, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Ralph's absence was a shadow over the investigation, and Poirot's determination to find him suggested the detective was closing in on a truth Shepherd wasn't sure he wanted revealed. As they left Flora, Poirot turned to Shepherd with a question that felt like a blade. "Mon ami, you were at the Three Boars the night of the murder, were you not? Before the phone call summoned you back to Fernley Park?" Shepherd froze, his mind scrambling for a response. Yes, I stopped by briefly, to check on a patient," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Poirot nodded, but his eyes held a glint of suspicion. "A patient and yet, you did not mention this before. Curious, Nan." Before Shepherd could reply, Poirot strode toward the study, beckoning him to follow the study. Still cordoned off by the police, was a grim reminder of the crime. The blood stain on the carpet had darkened, and the open window let in a chill breeze. Poirot knelt by the window, examining the footprints in the soft earth outside. "These prints," he said, "they match the shoes of Monsieur Ralph, yet they are too perfect, too deliberate. Someone wishes us to believe Ralph entered here, stabbed his stepfather, and fled. But I, Hercule Poirot, am not so easily deceived." Shepherd's heart pounded as Poirot traced the prints to a hedge, where a small, glinting object caught his eye. It was a ring, simple but elegant, with an inscription, "To you be, with love." Poirot held it up, his expression unreadable. "You be," he murmured, "Ursula born, perhaps a parlor maid with secrets." Shepherd, struggling to maintain his calm, suggested it might belong to anyone. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, but secrets, they have a way of revealing themselves." The investigation took a new turn as Caroline Shepherd, ever the village sleuth, arrived at Fernley Park with a tidbit of gossip that sent ripples through the case. "James," she said, bustling into the drawing-room, "I've been talking to Mrs. Russell, the housekeeper. She says Ursula Bourne wasn't just a parlor maid. She was married, secretly, to Ralph Peyton." Flora gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, and Shepherd felt the room tilt slightly. Caroline continued, oblivious to the tension. "Mrs. Russell saw them together, whispering in the garden, and Ursula was wearing a ring just like the one you found." Mr. Poirot eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands together. "Magnifique, the pieces, they begin to fit. But we must confirm this marriage. Dr. Shepherd, you will accompany me to the village registry." Shepherd, his mind a whirlwind of dread and calculation, nodded mutely. The registry confirmed Caroline's gossip. Ursula Bourne and Ralph Peyton had married in secret 3 months earlier, a fact Ralph had kept from Ackroyd, fearing his disapproval as they left the registry. Poirot's demeanor shifted to one of quiet intensity. "This marriage," he said, "it changes everything. Ralph had a motive, Ackroyd's fortune perhaps, or fear of disinheritance, but the footprints, the ring, the note from Liverpool, they are a deception, a tapestry woven to mislead." He turned to Shepherd, his gaze piercing. "And you, my friend, you were at the Three Boars, where Ralph's shoes vanished. Tell me, what else do you know?" Shepherd's mouth went dry, but he managed a weak smile. "I've told you everything, Poirot. I'm just a village doctor, trying to help." Poirot's nod was non-committal, but his words carried a warning. "The truth, it is like a shadow, Dr. Shepherd. It follows you, even when you do not see it." The day wore on with Poirot's investigation gaining momentum. He interviewed Ursula Bourne, who admitted her marriage but swore Ralph was innocent. "He was with me that night," she said, her voice steady despite her pale face. "We were planning to tell Roger, but then," her voice broke, and Poirot with surprising gentleness assured her he would uncover the truth. "Shepherd, watching from the sidelines, felt the walls closing in. Ursula's alibi for Ralph was a lifeline, but Poirot's relentless probing threatened to unravel Shepard's carefully constructed facade. As evening fell, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room for an update. Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, her face pinched with worry, demanded answers. Major Hector Blunt, silent but watchful, stood by Flora, who clung to the hope of Ralph's innocence. Geoffrey Raymond, the secretary, fidgeted nervously, his usual charm subdued. Poirot paced before them, his voice calm but commanding. "Madame, messieurs," he began, "the footprints lead to deception. The killer wishes us to believe Ralph Peyton is guilty, but I say Nan, the truth lies elsewhere, in the shadows of Fernley Park." He held up the ring, its inscription catching the light. "This belongs to Madame Peyton Ursula Bourne. Her marriage to Ralph was a secret, but not the motive. The motive lies in greed, in fear, in a truth hidden by one among us." His eyes swept the room, lingering on Shepard for a moment too long. "Tomorrow," Poirot concluded, "we shall visit Liverpool. Ralph Peyton holds a piece of this puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find him." The chapter closed with Shepard, alone in his study, his pen trembling as he wrote. The discovery of Ralph's hideout in Liverpool, Ursula's secret marriage, and Poirot's relentless pursuit had tightened the noose around the truth. Shepard's narration, laced with a growing sense of dread, hinted at his own vulnerability. "The footprints," he wrote, "they lead somewhere, but where? Poirot sees more than he says, and I fear what he will find." The final words hung in the air, a chilling promise of revelations to come, leaving listeners to question not just Ralph's guilt, but Shepard's own role in the unfolding drama. Chapter 6. The Dictaphone's Secret Dr. James Shepard's voice trembled slightly as he recounted the events following the discovery of Roger Ackroyd's murder, his narration weaving through the quiet village of King's Abbot, now alive with suspicion and whispers. The air was thick with unease, as if the very cobblestones of the village square could murmur secrets. Hercule Poirot, with his impeccable mustache and piercing green eyes, had taken charge of the investigation, his presence both a comfort and a challenge to the villagers. Shepard, his reluctant assistant, found himself caught in the detective's orbit, drawn deeper into a case that felt increasingly personal. The morning after Poirot's initial examination of the crime scene, the sun cast a pale light over Fernley Park, Roger Ackroyd's grand estate. The manor, with its ivy-clad walls and sprawling gardens, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the darkness within. Poirot stood in the study where Ackroyd had been found, his body slumped in a high-backed chair, a dagger buried in his neck. The room was unchanged since the night of the murder, save for the faint chalk outline where Ackroyd's body had lain. Poirot's gaze lingered on the desk where papers were neatly stacked, undisturbed except for a single letter, Mrs. Ferrar's final missive, partially read and now missing. Shepard hovered near the doorway, his medical bag clutched tightly. As Poirot paced the room with the precision of a metronome, "The dictaphone, mon ami," Poirot said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "It is the key, is it not? A machine that speaks for the dead." Shepard blinked, startled. "The dictaphone, you mean the one we found in my bag?" "Precisely." And Poirot's eyes gleamed with a knowing glint. "A curious device to find in a doctor's possession. Nan, tell me, doctor, why was it there?" Shepard shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening on the bag's handle. I sometimes use it to record patient notes. It's convenient, especially when I'm called out late." Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he was unconvinced. He knelt beside the desk, examining the floor with a magnifying glass. And yet, this dictaphone, it was rigged with a timer, was it not? A most ingenious trick to make it seem Monsieur Ackroyd was alive, speaking, when he was already dead. Shepard's heart skipped a beat, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "A timer, that's absurd. Who would go to such lengths?" Poirot stood, brushing dust from his knees. Someone who wished to deceive. Someone who needed time to escape suspicion. He turned to Shepard, his gaze sharp. "Let us reconstruct the night. Doctor, you received a phone call, you said, summoning you back to Fernley Park. Yet Parker, the butler, denies making such a call." Shepard nodded, his throat dry. "That's right. I was at home, about to retire, when the phone rang. A voice, Parker's I thought, told me Mr. Ackroyd needed me urgently. I came at once and found him ... dead." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And this call, it came at what time?" 9:45, I believe," Shepard replied, his mind racing to recall the details he'd rehearsed. "I arrived at Fernley Park by 10. Poirot tapped his chin, his eyes never leaving Shepard's face. "And yet, the medical evidence suggests Monsieur Ackroyd was killed closer to 9. Curious, Nan. A gap of nearly an hour." Shepard felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. "The medical evidence isn't precise. Shock, blood loss, these things can blur the timeline," perhaps, Poirot conceded, but his tone was skeptical. He moved to the window where muddy footprints led to the sill, suggesting the killer had entered or exited there. "These footprints," he mused, "they belong to Ralph Peyton, or so we are meant to believe. Size 9, from the 3 bores, inconvenient, is it not?" Shepard seized the opportunity to redirect. Ralph's disappearance does look suspicious. Flora's convinced he's innocent, but he's been missing since the murder. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mademoiselle Flora is loyal, but loyalty can blind. We shall see about Monsieur Peyton. For now, let us focus on the dictaphone.
Come.
Doctor, show me your bag. Reluctantly, Shepard opened his medical bag, revealing the dictaphone nestled among bandages and stethoscopes. Poirot examined it, his fingers deftly probing the device. A timer, set to play a recording of Monsieur Ackroyd's voice at 9:30. A conversation that never happened, yet heard by Parker through the door. A clever ruse to establish an alibi. Shepard's pulse quickened. You think the killer used the dictaphone to fake Ackroyd's voice? That's diabolical. Diabolical. Yes, Poirot agreed, his voice soft but laced with menace. And close. The murderer is closer than we think, Doctor. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Shepard forced a laugh, hoping to dispel the tension. Closer, you mean someone in the household? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he turned to the study's chair, the one he'd noted as out of place. This chair, he said. It was moved after the murder. Why? To hide something, perhaps, or to draw attention elsewhere. Shepard followed Poirot's gaze, his mind racing. The chair had been shifted slightly, its position misaligned with the room's symmetry. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed glaringly obvious. Maybe it was knocked over in a struggle, he suggested weakly. No, struggle, Poirot countered. The wound was precise, instantaneous. The chair was moved deliberately. He paused, his eyes locking onto Shepard's. Tell me, Doctor, where were you before the phone call? You mentioned visiting the Three Boars earlier that evening. Shepard's stomach churned. I stopped by to check on a patient, old Mr. Hammond. He's been ill. Poirot nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. And while there, you saw no one else. No one who might have borrowed your dictaphone, perhaps. No one, Shepard said quickly, too quickly. He cursed himself inwardly. Poirot's questions were like traps, each one designed to catch him off guard. The investigation continued through the morning, with Poirot questioning the household. Parker, the butler, maintained his composure, insisting he'd heard Ackroyd speaking at 9:30, though he admitted the voice sounded odd, like it was coming from a machine. Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, fidgeted nervously, her financial troubles laid bare by Poirot's gentle but relentless probing. Flora Ackroyd, pale and resolute, clung to her belief in Ralph's innocence, while Major Hector Blunt, the reserved guest, offered little beyond monosyllabic answers. Geoffrey Raymond, the charming secretary, seemed oddly unperturbed, his alibi vague but unchallenged. As noon approached, Shepard's sister, Caroline, burst into Fernley Park, her eyes alight with gossip. James, you'll never believe it, she exclaimed, ignoring Poirot's presence. There's talk in the village about a stranger seen near Fernley Park on the night of the murder, a man in a dark coat, lurking by the gates. Mrs. Folliot saw him, and she's never wrong about these things. Poirot's interest peaked. A stranger, you say? Most interesting, Mademoiselle Caroline. And what time was this sighting? Caroline beamed, thrilled to be part of the investigation. Just after 9, she said. She was walking her dog, and there he was, skulking about like a thief. Shepard seized the opportunity to shift focus. A stranger. That could be our man Poirot, someone from outside the village, perhaps connected to Mrs. Farrer's blackmail. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps, Doctor, or perhaps it is a distraction. The truth. It hides in plain sight, does it not? The day wore on, with Poirot and Shepard retracing the murder night's timeline. They visited the Three Boars Inn, where the landlord confirmed Ralph Peyton's shoes were missing, though he swore Ralph had been in his room all evening. The footprints, perfectly matched to Ralph's size, seemed too convenient, too staged. Poirot's questions grew sharper, his focus returning to Shepard's movements. You were at the inn, then home, then back to Fernley Park. A busy evening, Doctor, and yet no one saw you between 9 and 9:45. Shepard's mouth went dry. I was at home, I told you, preparing for bed alone. Poirot pressed double quotes. Yes, alone. Shepard snapped, his patience fraying. Caroline was upstairs, asleep. Poirot's eyes softened, but the intensity remained. A pity, Doctor, an alibi. It is a fragile thing without a witness. As the evening fell, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room, the air thick with anticipation. Shepard stood by the fireplace, his heart pounding as Poirot began to speak. Miss Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. We are close to the truth. The dictaphone, the footprints, the missing letter, they all point to one person. The murderer is not a stranger, not an outsider. The murderer is among us, in this very house. A collective gasp filled the room. Flora clutched Blunt's arm, her eyes wide. Mrs. Ackroyd's hands trembled, and Raymond's easy smile faltered. Parker stood rigid, his face unreadable. Shepard felt the weight of Poirot's gaze, though the detective's eyes swept the room impartially. Poirot continued, was used to create an illusion of life, to delay the discovery of death. The footprints, they were planted to implicate Monsieur Peyton, and the phone caller. The phone call that summoned Dr. Shepard was no accident. It was orchestrated, timed to perfection. Shepard's knees weakened, but he forced himself to stand tall. "You're saying the killer planned every detail?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm within. Poirot said, his eyes locking onto Shepard's. "Every detail in the killer. He is clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on them all. Shepard's mind raced, replaying every moment, every lie. He'd been careful, meticulous, but Poirot's relentless logic was closing in. The dictaphone, the footprints, the each clue a thread in a net that was tightening around him as the meeting adjourned. Poirot pulled Shepard aside, his voice low. "Doctor, a word. You are a man of science, of reason. But the heart, it betrays us all. Beware the truth you hide, for it will not stay hidden." Shepard nodded, his throat too tight to speak. As Poirot walked away, his silhouette framed by the dying light, Shepard felt the walls of Fernley Park closing in. The dictaphone's secret was unraveling, and with it, his carefully constructed facade. The murderer was closer than they thought, than anyone could imagine. The village of King's Abbot settled into an uneasy night, the stars obscured by clouds. Shepard sat at his desk, his manuscript open before him, the words blurring as he wrote. He described Poirot's investigation, the dictaphone's trick, the footprints' deception, each sentence a step closer to his own undoing. Voice echoed from the kitchen. Oblivious to the storm brewing in her brother's heart, Poirot's words haunted him. "The murderer is closer than we think." Shepard stared at the dictaphone on his desk, its silent presence a mocking reminder of his crime. He'd been so sure, so careful, but Poirot's little grey cells were relentless. The truth was near, and Shepard knew he could not outrun it. Forever the investigation pressed on over the following days, with Poirot's focus sharpening. He returned to the study repeatedly, examining the chair, the window, the desk. He questioned Shepard about his medical practice, his patients, his habits, each query a probe into Shepard's carefully guarded life. "You are a busy man, Dr. Poirot remarked one afternoon, standing in Shepard's consulting room. "So many patients, so many visits, yet you find time to assist me. Most commendable." Shepard forced a smile. "It's my duty to help, Poirot. A man's been murdered." "Indeed," Poirot said, his eyes glinting. "And a man's secrets, they are the key to his death." The village buzzed with speculation, Caroline at the forefront. She cornered Shepard one evening, her eyes alight with a new theory. "James, I've been thinking about that stranger Mrs. Folliot saw. What if he's the blackmailer? The one who drove Mrs. Ferrars to her death, and then killed Roger to cover it up?" Shepard seized the chance to deflect. "It's possible. Caroline, Poirot's looking into it. He's convinced the answer lies in the details." Caroline nodded, satisfied. "He's a clever man. That Mr. Poirot. I wouldn't want to be the one hiding something from him." Shepard's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. "No, you wouldn't." Poirot's investigation took a new turn when he received a telegram from Liverpool, confirming Ralph Peyton's presence there. Flora, devastated but determined, insisted on joining Poirot to confront her fiancé. Shepard accompanied them, his mind a whirlwind of fear and calculation. Ralph, pale and haggard, swore he'd fled to avoid suspicion, not because he was guilty. "I loved Roger," he insisted. "I'd never hurt him." Poirot listened, his expression unreadable. "Then why run, Monsieur Peyton? The innocent, they stay and fight." Ralph's eyes dropped. "I was scared. The shoes, the footprints, it looked bad." Poirot nodded, but his attention shifted to Shepard. "And you, Doctor, you were at the Three Boars when these shoes went missing. A coincidence, perhaps?" Shepard's mouth went dry. "I told you, I was checking on a patient, of course," Poirot said, but his smile was cold. "We shall see." Back in King's Abbot, Poirot gathered the household again, this time in the library. The air was thick with tension, each person eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the room. "Miss Amos," he began, "we are close to the truth. The dictaphone, it was a stroke of genius, but genius, it leaves traces. The chair, the footprints, the phone call, they all point to one person." Shepard's heart pounded, his hands clammy. He forced himself to meet Poirot's gaze, but the detective's eyes seemed to see through him. "The murderer," Poirot continued, "is someone who knew Monsieur Ackroyd's habits, who had access to his study, who could manipulate the timeline. Someone trusted, someone close." Flora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mrs. Ackroyd's eyes darted nervously, while Blunt's jaw tightened. Raymond leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Parker stood silently, his face a mask, and the dictaphone, Poirot said, his voice rising. "It was not merely a tool. It was a confession. Hidden in plain sight, the killer used it to create an illusion. But illusions, they crumble under scrutiny." Shepard's mind raced, searching for an escape. He'd planned every detail: the dictaphone, the footprints, the phone call, but Poirot was unraveling it all. The chair, that damned chair, had been his one mistake. He'd moved it to retrieve The dictaphone, not realizing its position would betray him. As Poirot's speech drew to a close, he turned to Shepherd, his voice soft but piercing. "Doctor, you have been most helpful. But tell me, why did you not mention the stranger at the gates? You were there, were you not?" Shepherd froze, his mind blank. I didn't see anyone." Poirot's smile was almost pitying. Pity, doctor, for the truth. It sees all." The meeting ended, but Shepherd's world was collapsing. He returned home, his manuscript a lifeline and a curse. He wrote feverishly, detailing Poirot's relentless pursuit, the dictaphone's secret, the footprints' lie. Each word was a confession, a reckoning. He knew Poirot was close, too close. The stranger at the gates, had someone seen him? Had he been careless? Caroline's voice broke through his thoughts, cheerful and oblivious. "James, you look pale. Are you coming down with something?" "Just tired," he muttered, his pen trembling. "It's been a long week." As night fell, Shepherd sat alone, the dictaphone on his desk, a silent accuser. Poirot's words echoed. "The murderer is closer than we think." He knew the end was near. He'd underestimated Poirot, underestimated the power of those little gray cells. The truth was closing in, and Shepherd could feel its weight, heavy and inescapable. He wrote on, the manuscript growing, each page a step toward his confession. The dictaphone's secret was his undoing, a clever trick that had failed against Poirot's brilliance. He thought of Caroline, of her trust, her gossip, her love. He couldn't let her see him exposed, couldn't let her live with the shame. The night stretched on, the village silent, the stars hidden. Shepherd's pen moved faster, the words pouring out his crime, his fear, his regret. The dictaphone, the footprints, the chair, they were all there, laid bare. And Poirot, with his relentless logic, was waiting. The days blurred together, each one a tightening noose. Poirot's investigation grew more intense, his questions more pointed. He revisited the three Boers, questioned the landlord again, examined the shoes. He spoke to Mrs. Folliot, confirming the stranger's presence, though her description was vague, a man in a dark coat, nothing more. Shepherd's narration grew strained, his manuscript a mirror of his unraveling mind. He described Poirot's visits to Fernley Park, his conversations with Flora, his gentle probing of Mrs. Ackroyd. Each encounter felt like a step closer to exposure. Poirot's eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, seemed to see everything. One afternoon, Poirot called Shepherd to the study, where the chair still sat, slightly askew. "Doctor," he said, "let us speak plainly. The dictaphone, it was yours. The phone call, it was arranged. The footprints, they were planted, and you were there." Shepherd's heart stopped. "You're accusing me? That's preposterous." Poirot's smile was sad. "Not an accusation, doctor, a truth. You loved your sister Nan. You wished to protect her, but murder, it is a heavy price." Shepherd's voice cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Poirot sighed, his eyes softening. "You do, doctor, and soon, the world will know. But for now, I give you time. Use it wisely." Shepherd stumbled home, his mind a storm. Poirot knew. He knew. The manuscript was nearly complete, a confession disguised as a narrative. He wrote of the blackmail, the letter, the murder. He wrote of Mrs. Ferrars, her guilt, her payment. He wrote of Ackroyd, his discovery, his threat to expose. He wrote of the dagger, the dictaphone, the chair. As dawn broke, Shepherd sat back, his hands shaking. The manuscript was done, a testament to his crime. He thought of Poirot, of Caroline, of the village. He thought of the truth. So close, so heavy. He made his choice. The dictaphone sat silent, its secret no longer his own. Poirot's words echoed one last time. "The murderer is closer than we think." And Shepherd, alone in the dawn, knew he was right. Chapter 7. Motives and Moneys. The morning after Poirot's unsettling revelation about the dictaphone, the air in King's Abbot felt heavier, as if the village itself were holding its breath. I, Dr. James Shepherd, sat in my consulting room ostensibly, reviewing patient notes, but my mind was far from medicine. The murder of Roger Ackroyd had turned my quiet life upside down, and Poirot's probing questions were like needles pricking at the edges of my composure. His cryptic remark from the previous evening, "The murderer is closer than we think," lingered in my thoughts. As persistent as a low fever, I glanced out the window at the village green, where a few locals milled about, their faces drawn with the weight of gossip. Caroline, my sister, had already been out that morning, gathering snippets of rumor as eagerly as a magpie collects shiny trinkets. She'd returned with tales of a stranger seen near Fernley Park on the night of the murder, a tidbit she delivered with the triumphant air of someone who'd unearthed a buried treasure. I listened to her with half an ear, my thoughts drifting to Poirot and his relentless pursuit of the truth. The little Belgian detective had requested my presence at Fernley Park that afternoon, and as I made my way through the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Not that I suspected Poirot of malice. His manner was too precise, too methodical for that, but his ability to see through people was unnerving. I passed the Three Boars Inn, where Ralph Peyton had been hiding before Poirot tracked him to Liverpool. The inn's sign creaked in the breeze, a reminder of how quickly secrets could unravel in this place. At Fernley Park, the atmosphere was tense. The household had gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Roger's sister-in-law, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her thin lips pursed as if she were swallowing something bitter. Flora Ackroyd, pale but composed, stood near the window, her engagement to Ralph Peyton now a source of both hope and scandal. Major Hector Blunt, the reserved big-game hunter, hovered near her, his usual stoicism softened by a flicker of concern. In his eyes, Geoffrey Raymond, Ackroyd's secretary, leaned against the mantelpiece, his charm subdued but still evident in his easy posture. And Parker, the butler, stood at the edge of the room, his expression unreadable, though I caught him glancing at me more than once. Poirot entered with his characteristic briskness, his small frame somehow commanding the room. His mustache twitched as he surveyed us, his eyes bright with that peculiar intensity that made one feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "today we discuss motives. For murder, you see, is never without reason. It is born of greed, of fear, of love, or of hate. And in this house, there are many reasons to kill." The room seemed to tighten, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I shifted in my seat, my medical bag. At my feet, its weight a strange comfort. Poirot's gaze swept over us, lingering on each face as if peeling back layers of pretense. "Let us begin," he said, "with money. Always, it is the heart of so many crimes." He turned to Mrs. Ackroyd, whose fingers tightened on the arms of her chair. "Madame, it is known that you have debts. Monsieur Ackroyd, he was generous, but perhaps not generous enough. His death brings you closer to a share of his fortune on." Mrs. Ackroyd's face flushed a mottled red. "How dare you?" she snapped, her voice shrill. "I loved my brother. I would never," she broke off, her hand rising to her throat as if to choke back the words. Poirot raised a placating hand. "I accuse no one, madame. I merely observe facts. They are stubborn things." He turned to Flora, his expression softening. "Mademoiselle Ackroyd, you, too, stand to inherit. Your engagement to Monsieur Peyton. It is a complication. Yes, if he is guilty, your future is uncertain. If he is innocent, the fortune is yours to share." Flora's eyes flashed. With defiance. "Ralph didn't do it," she said firmly. "I'd stake my life on it." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "But love, it blinds us to truths we do not wish to see." He glanced at Major Blunt, who stiffened almost imperceptibly. "And you, Major, you care for Mademoiselle Ackroyd, do you not? A man, in love, he might do much to protect the one he adores, even if it means removing an obstacle." Blunt's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. I watched him closely, noting the way his hands clenched at his sides. Poirot's words were like stones dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of unease through the room. "And Monsieur Raymond," Poirot continued, turning to the secretary, "you are a young man of ambition. Monsieur Ackroyd trusted you, but perhaps you saw more in his fortune than in his trust. Your alibi, it is vague, and your charm, it conceals much." Raymond gave a nervous laugh, running a hand through his hair. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Mr. Poirot. I liked Roger. He was good to me." Poirot nodded, as if considering this, but his eyes remained sharp. "And then there is Mademoiselle Bourne, the parlour maid, a woman with secrets. And my friend Dr. Shepherd's sister, Mademoiselle Caroline. She tells me of rumors of a marriage, perhaps to Monsieur Peyton himself." The mention of Ursula Bourne sent a murmur through the room. Flora's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Ursula married to Ralph? That's impossible, is it?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but piercing. "We shall see." He turned to me, and I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "And you, Doctor, you are close to all of this. You know the secrets of King's Abbot, the pulses of its people. You were at the Three Boars that night, were you not? Before the murder, before the phone call that summoned you back to Fernley Park." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I was visiting a patient," I said, "nothing unusual." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But the truth, it is like a shadow. It follows us, even when we do not see it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over us like dust. I felt Parker's gaze on me again, and I wondered what he saw or what he suspected. Poirot clapped his hands, breaking the tension. "Now, Miss Amos, let us speak of the phone call. The call that brought Dr. Shepherd back to Fernley Park. The call that Parker denies making." He paced the room, his small steps precise, almost theatrical. "I have made inquiries," he said. "A telegram arrived this morning from the steamer company. The call, it was made by a ship's steward, a man named Thomas Kent, and this call, it was made at the request of someone here in King's Abbot." A gasp escaped Flora, and Mrs. Ackroyd's hand flew to her mouth. I felt my pulse quicken, though I kept my expression neutral. Poirot stopped pacing and turned to face us, his eyes gleaming. "Who, I wonder, would arrange such a call? And why?" "To lure Dr. Shepherd back to the scene, perhaps to ensure the body was found at the right moment." He let the question hang unanswered, and I felt the room's attention shift to me. I forced a smile, though my throat was dry. "You're suggesting someone wanted me to find Ackroyd's body?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Poirot tilted his head. I suggest nothing, Doctor, I observe, and I think. Always, I think with the little grey cells. The conversation turned to Ursula Bourne, who was summoned to the drawing-room. She entered with her usual quiet grace, her dark eyes wary but composed. Poirot wasted no time. Mademoiselle Bourne, he said, it is said you have a connection to Monsieur Peyton, a marriage perhaps. Ursula's face paled, but she held her ground. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice steady. Poirot smiled, a small, knowing smile. You are loyal, mademoiselle, but loyalty, it can be a dangerous thing. Monsieur Peyton, he stands to inherit a great fortune. If you are his wife, you share in that fortune. A motive, perhaps, for silence. Ursula's lips parted, but no words came. Flora stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ursula, is it true? Are you married to Ralph? Ursula hesitated, then nodded, a single, reluctant motion. Yes, she whispered. We married in secret 6 months ago. Roger didn't know. The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Ackroyd's face was a mask of outrage, while Raymond looked genuinely surprised. Blunt's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes lingered on Flora, who seemed on the verge of tears. I watched it all, my mind racing. Ursula's marriage to Ralph was a complication, a thread in the tangled web Poirot was unraveling. But how did it fit with the dictaphone, the footprints, the phone call? Poirot raised a hand for silence. This marriage, it changes much, he said. Monsieur Peyton, he is no longer a mere suspect. He is a man with a secret, a man with a motive. But is he the killer? Or is he, perhaps, a pawn in a larger game? He turned to me again, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Dr. Shepherd, you were at the Three Boars that night. You saw Monsieur Peyton, did you not? I nodded, careful to keep my voice even. Briefly, he was distressed. Distressed, Poirot repeated, as if tasting the word. And yet, you did not mention this before. Why, I wonder? I shrugged, forcing a casual air. It didn't seem relevant. I was there for a patient, not to spy on Ralph. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned back to the group. Motives, he said, his voice rising. They are like threads in a tapestry. Greed, fear, love, they weave together, and somewhere in the pattern lies the truth. Monsieur Ackroyd's fortune, it draws many eyes as death. It opens many doors. But which door leads to the killer? He paused, letting his words sink in. We have Mrs. Ackroyd's debts, Mademoiselle Flora's inheritance, Major Blunt's devotion, Monsieur Raymond's ambition, Mademoiselle Bourne's secret, and Dr. Shepherd's proximity. And then, there is the letter from Madame Ferris, the letter that spoke of blackmail. Who knew of it? Who feared it? I felt a prickle of unease. The letter, that damned letter, was the key to it all. Ackroyd had been reading it when I left him that night, his face pale with shock. Mrs. Ferris had named her blackmailer, and Ackroyd had been about to act. But who was it, and how much did Poirot know? The meeting ended with Poirot's promise to reconvene the next day. Tomorrow, he said, we will speak of the chair in the study. It tells a story of its own. He smiled a small, enigmatic smile, and I felt a chill run through me. The chair, always the chair. What did he see in it that I had missed? As the household dispersed, I lingered, watching Poirot as he spoke quietly with Flora. She was pleading with him, her voice, low but urgent, no doubt begging for Ralph's innocence. Blunt hovered nearby, his silent presence a stark contrast to her agitation. Mrs. Ackroyd swept out of the room, muttering about the indignity of it all, while Raymond followed, his usual charm replaced by a thoughtful frown. Parker remained by the door, his eyes on me again, and I wondered what he was thinking. I left Fernley Park with my mind in turmoil. Poirot's questions, his relentless focus on details, were like a net closing around me. The dictaphone, the footprints, the phone call. The chair, each was a piece of the puzzle, and I feared how they might fit together. Caroline was waiting for me at home, her eyes bright with the latest gossip. They're saying it was a professional job, she said, pouring tea. A hired killer, perhaps sent by someone with a grudge. I forced a laugh. Caroline, you read too many novels. She huffed undeterred. Mark my words, James, there's more to this than meets the eye. That Poirot, he's clever. He'll find the truth no matter how deep it's buried. I sipped my tea, the warmth doing little to ease the cold knot in my stomach. Poirot was clever, too clever. His little grey cells were working overtime, and I feared they were working against me. The phone call, arranged through a steward I'd paid to make it, had been a calculated risk. It was meant to establish my alibi, to place me far from the crime when Ackroyd's body was found. But Poirot had traced it, and now I wondered how much else he knew. That night, I lay awake replaying the events of the murder night. I'd been careful, so careful. The dictaphone, set to play Ackroyd's voice at the right moment, had been a stroke of genius. The footprints, crafted with Ralph's stolen shoes, had pointed suspicion in his direction. And the letter, Mrs. Ferris' damning letter, had been destroyed, or so I thought. But Poirot's obsession with details, with the chair and the bag and the timeline, made me question my every move. The next morning, Caroline was up early, her gossip mill all ready. Turning, they found something near the summer house, she said, her voice hushed with excitement. A ring, James. A woman's ring, with initials inside. Do you think it's Ursula's? I shrugged, my mind elsewhere. Could be anyone's, I said. This village is full of secrets. But as I walked to Fernley Park for Poirot's next meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ring was another piece of the puzzle. Another thread in Poirot's tapestry. The man was relentless, his mind a machine that ground down lies until only the truth remained. And the truth, I feared, was something I could not afford at Fernley Park. Poirot was waiting, his demeanor as calm and precise as ever. He greeted me with a nod, his eyes searching mine. Dr. Shepherd, he said, today we will speak of the chair. But first, tell me why did you not mention the ring? I blinked, caught off guard. The ring. I didn't know about it until this morning. He tilted his head, his mustache twitching. Curious, he said. For a man so close to the village you miss much, or perhaps you see more than you say. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. I'm just a country Dr. Poirot. I don't have your knack for details, he chuckled. But there was no warmth in it. We shall see, Doctor, we shall see. The meeting began, and Poirot launched into his analysis of the chair, his voice weaving a spell over the room. He spoke of its position, of the marks on the floor, of the way it had been moved to conceal something, perhaps the removal. I listened, my mind racing, as he described the killer's movements, entering through the window, stabbing Ackroyd, setting the dictaphone to play, and then slipping away, leaving a trail of false clues. Greed and fear, said his voice rising, they drive the killer. Greed for money, fear of exposure. The letter from Madame Ferreris, it named the blackmailer. And the blackmailer, he could not let that secret live. I felt the room's eyes on me, though I kept my gaze on Poirot. He was close, too close. The chair, the dictaphone, the phone. Called, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had constructed, a puzzle I had thought foolproof. But Poirot was no fool. As the meeting ended, Poirot pulled me aside. Dr. Shepherd, he said softly, you are a man of science. Yes, you understand cause and effect. Tell me, what is the cause of your silence? I met his gaze, my voice steady. I've told you everything I know, Poirot. He smiled, a small, sad smile. No, my friend. You have told me everything you wish. Me too, no. There is a difference. He turned away, leaving me with the weight of his words. As I walked home, the village seemed to close in around me, its familiar streets now a maze of suspicion. Caroline was waiting, her eyes bright with questions, but I brushed past her, my mind consumed by Poirot's relentless pursuit. The truth, he had said, was in the details, and as I sat in my study, my medical bag at my feet, I wondered how many details I had overlooked. The chair, the ring, the phone call, the footprints, they were all threads in Poirot's tapestry, and I feared the pattern they would form. The day wore on, and I found myself avoiding Caroline's questions, her chatter about the ring and the stranger and Ursula's marriage grating on my nerves. I needed to think, to plan, to anticipate Poirot's next move, but the more I thought, the more I realized how little control I had. Poirot was a force of nature, a mind that saw through lies as easily as a knife cuts through cloth. By evening I was restless, pacing my study as the shadows lengthened. The phone call had been my first mistake, a calculated risk that had backfired. The steward, Thomas Kent, had been a reliable contact, a man I'd paid well to make the call from a distant port. But Poirot had traced it, and now I wondered what else he had uncovered. The dictaphone, hidden in my bag, had been a map, but Poirot's discovery of its timer had turned it into a liability, and the footprints, Ralph's shoes, stolen from the Three Boars, had been meant to point suspicion at him. But Poirot had seen through that. Too, I sat down, my hands trembling as I poured a glass of whiskey. The village was quiet now, the green empty, the inn's sign still creaking in the breeze. But in my mind the noise was deafening. Poirot's voice, Caroline's gossip, the ticking of the dictaphone's timer. I had been so careful, so precise, but Poirot was unraveling it all. The next morning I woke to find Caroline in a state of excitement. They've identified the ring, she said, her voice breathless. It's got initials UB Ursula Bourne's, they're saying, but there's more, James. They're saying she was seen arguing with Ackroyd that night, before he died. I nodded, my mind racing. Ursula's ring, her marriage, her argument with Ackroyd, they were distractions but dangerous ones. If Poirot focused on her, it might buy me time, but if he saw through her, as he had seen through so much else, I was running out of places to hide. I made my way to Fernley Park, my heart heavy with dread. Poirot was waiting, his eyes bright with that maddening intensity. Dr. Shepherd, he said, you are late, but no matter. Today, we will speak of the truth. And the truth, it is like a wound, it must be opened to heal. I forced a smile, but inside I was unraveling. The chair, the dictaphone, the phone call, the ring, they were all closing in, and Poirot was at the center, pulling the threads together. I had underestimated him, and now I feared it was too late. As the household gathered, Poirot began to speak, his voice calm but relentless. He spoke of motives, of greed and fear, of the letter that had named the blackmailer. He spoke of the chair, moved to conceal a crime. He spoke of the phone call, arranged to manipulate time, and as he spoke I felt the net tighten, the truth drawing closer with every word. Greed and fear, Poirot said, his eyes locking onto mine. They drive the killer, and the killer Amos, is here among us. The room was silent. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. I felt my heart pound, my hands clench, my breath catch. Poirot knew. He had always known, and as he turned to me, his smile both gentle and merciless, I realized there was no escape. The chapter closed with Poirot's final words, a promise that tomorrow would bring answers. The truth, he said, it is like a mirror. It shows us what we are, even when we wish to look away. And as I left Fernley Park, the weight of that truth pressed down on me, heavier than ever before. Chapter 8. The chairs clued the morning after Poirot's intense scrutiny of the dictaphone. The air in King's Abbot felt heavier, as if the village itself were holding its breath. I, Dr. James Shepherd, found myself increasingly unsettled, my usual composure fraying at the edges. The murder of Roger Ackroyd had stirred the quiet lanes of our little world into a frenzy of whispers and sideways glances. And now, with Hercule Poirot's piercing gaze fixed on every detail, I could feel the noose of suspicion tightening not around any one neck, but around the entire household of Fernley Park. I breakfasted alone that morning, Caroline having risen early to pursue her own investigations. She had been out before dawn, no doubt gleaning scraps of gossip from the milkman or the postmistress. Her absence left me to my thoughts, which were far from pleasant. Poirot's focus on the dictaphone had been unnerving, but his latest obsession, moved chair in Ackroyd's study, annoyed me even more. Why did he care so much about a piece of furniture? It was a simple mahogany chair, sturdy and unremarkable, yet Poirot treated it as if it held the key to the entire mystery. I met Poirot at Fernley Park at 10 o'clock, as agreed. The estate loomed against the grey sky, its grandeur diminished by the shadow of death. Poirot was already in the study, standing by the desk where Ackroyd had been found. His body slumped, a dagger plunged into his neck. The room was much as it had been that night, save for the absence of the body. The window stood open, as it had been when I returned to find Ackroyd dead, and the curtains stirred faintly in the breeze. Poirot, dressed in his immaculate suit, was examining the chair with a magnifying glass, his lips pursed in concentration. "Good morning, mon ami," he said without looking up. "You are punctual, as always. Tell me, what do you make of this chair?" I glanced at it, my heart giving an unwelcome thud. "It's just a chair, Poirot. Mahogany, I'd say solid. Why does it matter?" He straightened, his green eyes gleaming with that unsettling intensity. "Matters, Dr. Shepherd, because it was moved. After the murder, someone moved this chair from its place by the desk to the corner by the bookcase. Why? That is the question." I shrugged, hoping my nonchalance. It was convincing. Perhaps someone bumped it while cleaning, or maybe Ackroyd himself moved it before he was killed. Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching. Non, the chair was moved after the murder and before you returned to find the body. The marks on the carpet, they tell the story. See here." He pointed to faint indentations in the thick pile, barely visible unless one knew to look. "The chair stood here, by the desk, for years. The carpet remembers, but now, it is there." He gestured to the corner, where the chair now sat. Slightly askew, I felt a prickle of unease. "What are you suggesting?" "That the murderer moved it." "Precisely," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. "The question is why? What did the murderer wish to hide by moving this chair?" I forced a laugh. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Poirot. It's just a chair." He fixed me with a look that seemed to see straight through me. "In a murder, Dr. Shepherd, there is no such thing as just anything. Every detail has its purpose. The chair was moved to conceal something or to reveal it." I turned away, pretending to study the bookshelf, my mind racing. The chair, the dictaphone, the footprints. Poirot was piecing together a puzzle I had thought so carefully constructed. I had to steer him away, to muddy the waters. "What about the footprints?" I asked, hoping to shift his focus. "You said they were important. Ralph Peyton's shoes, wasn't it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he allowed the change of subject. The footprints. They lead to the window, suggesting the killer entered and exited that way, but they are too perfect, too deliberate. They tell me not what happened, but what someone wishes me to believe happened." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "You think they were faked?" "I know they were faked," he said, his voice cutting like a blade. "The shoes were stolen from Ralph Peyton's room at the Three Boars. The prints were made after the murder." 2-point suspicion at him. "But the chair, mon ami, the chair tells a different story." I could feel the sweat on my palms, though I kept my hands in my pockets. "What story is that?" Poirot stepped closer to the chair, running his fingers along its back. "The chair was moved to hide the removal of the dictaphone. The killer placed it by the desk, where it could conceal the device during the murder. After, it was moved to the corner to make it seem as though nothing had been touched. But the carpet, it betrays the truth." I stared at him, my mind scrambling for a response. The dictaphone, of course, he had circled back to it. I had been so careful, setting the timer to play Ackroyd's voice, creating the illusion he was alive when I left the study. But Poirot's relentless attention to detail was unraveling my plan, thread by thread. "Let us reconstruct, Poirot," said his tone brisk. He moved to the window, then back to the desk, miming the actions of the killer. "The murderer enters through the window perhaps. They approach Ackroyd, who is seated here. The dagger is plunged into his neck, swift, silent. The dictaphone is set to play, creating the illusion of a conversation. The killer leaves, but not before moving the chair to hide their work. And then, Dr. Shepard, you receive the phone call that brings you back." I nodded, my face a mask of calm. "Yes, the phone call. Parker said it wasn't him." "Indeed," Poirot said, his eyes never leaving mine. "And yet, someone made that call. Someone who knew you would return, who wanted you to find the body. Why, Dr. Shepard, why were you chosen?" I felt the ground shift beneath me. I don't know. I was Ackroyd's friend. Maybe the killer wanted to shock me. Or perhaps, Poirot said softly, the killer wanted to ensure you were part of the narrative. You, the trusted doctor, the man who writes it all down. I laughed, though it sounded forced even to my ears. "You're not suggesting I'm the killer, are you, Poirot?" He did not smile. "I suggest nothing, mon ami," I observe. "And what I observe is that you were at the Three Boars earlier that evening, before the murder. You were seen there, by the innkeeper, and your black medical bag such a convenient place to hide a dictaphone." And my heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I was at the Three Boars to check on a patient. And my bag, do you think I carry a dictaphone around with me? It's full of medical supplies." Poirot tilted his head, studying me. "Perhaps, but the bag, it is large enough to hold many things. And you, Dr. Shepard, are a man of many secrets." I turned away, pretending to adjust my cufflinks, my mind racing. He was too close. Far too close. I had to distract him, to throw him off. The scent. "What about Caroline's rumor?" I said, grasping at straws. "She mentioned a blackmailer targeting Mrs. Ferris. Could that be connected?" Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. "Your sister, she is a font of information, the blackmailer. That is a thread worth pulling. Mrs. Ferris was tormented by someone who knew her secret, that she poisoned her husband. Ackroyd knew this, from her letter, and now he is dead. The blackmailer, perhaps, wished to silence him. I seized the opportunity." "Exactly. If we find the blackmailer, we find the killer." Poirot nodded, but his eyes were still sharp. "Perhaps, but the chair, Dr. Shepard, the chair tells me the killer is clever. Clever enough to stage a murder, to plant footprints, to use a dictaphone, clever enough to hide in plain sight." I felt a chill run down my spine. He was circling like a hawk over prey. I had to keep him talking, keep him distracted. "What's your next step then?" I asked, my voice light. "You've got the chair, the dictaphone, the footprints. What's left?" Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "What is left, mon ami, is the truth. And the truth, it is close, very close. I shall gather the household tonight, at Fernley Park. All will be invited: Mrs. Ackroyd, Flora, Major Blunt, Geoffrey Raymond, Ursula Bourne, Parker, and you, of course. I will lay out the facts, and the killer will be revealed." My stomach twisted, but I nodded. "Tonight, then I'll be there." "Bon," Poirot said, his voice soft. "And Dr. Shepard, beware the truth you hide. It has a way of coming to light." I left the study, my legs unsteady beneath me. The village seemed to close in around me as I walked back to my house, the familiar streets now alien and threatening. Caroline was waiting, her eyes bright with excitement. "James, what did Poirot say? Has he found the killer?" "Not yet," I said, forcing a smile. "But he's close. He's gathering everyone tonight." Her face lit up. "Oh, I knew it. He's brilliant, isn't he? I'll bet it's that Ursula Bourne, or maybe Raymond. He's too charming by half." I let her chatter, my mind elsewhere. Poirot's words echoed in my head. "Beware the truth you hide." He knew something, or suspected it. The chair, the dictaphone, the phone call, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had thought foolproof. But Poirot was no fool. He saw through the cracks, through the carefully laid plans. That afternoon I tried to distract myself with patience, but my hands shook as I wrote prescriptions. The village was abuzz with talk of the murder, and every conversation seemed to circle back to Poirot. The butcher claimed he'd seen Poirot measuring the grass near Fernley Park. The baker swore he'd overheard Poirot muttering about grey cells. Even the children whispered about the funny little man who was going to catch the killer. By evening, I was a bundle of nerves. I arrived at Fernley Park just before 8, the sky darkening with the threat of rain. The household was already gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mix of fear, curiosity, and defiance. Mrs. Ackroyd sat stiffly, her hands clutching a handkerchief. Flora was pale, her eyes darting to Major Blunt, who stood silently by the fireplace. Geoffrey Raymond lounged in a chair, his usual charm tempered by unease. Ursula Bourne, the parlourmaid, stood apart, her face unreadable. Parker, the butler, hovered near the door, his expression one of strained professionalism. Poirot entered last, his small frame commanding the room. He stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning each face. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and steady. Tonight, we will uncover the truth behind the murder of Roger Ackroyd. The clues are all before us: the chair, the dictaphone, the footprints, the letter. But the truth, it lies in the heart of one person in this room. A murmur ran through the group. Mrs. Ackroyd gasped, clutching her handkerchief tighter. Flora's hand. We found Blunt's, and he squeezed it reassuringly. Raymond shifted in his seat, his smile fading. I kept my face neutral, my heart pounding. Poirot continued, his voice measured. Let us begin with the chair. It was moved, after the murder, to hide the removal of the dictaphone. This device, so cleverly used, played Ackroyd's voice too, make it seem he was alive when he was already dead. The killer needed time to escape, time to plant the footprints, time to ensure suspicion fell elsewhere. He paced slowly, his eyes never leaving the group. The footprints, they were made with Ralph Payton's shoes, stolen from the Three Boars. But Ralph, he is not the killer. He was in Liverpool, hiding, yes, but not guilty. The shoes were taken by someone who knew his habits, who knew what to find them. Flora let out a small sob, and Blunt put an arm around her. Poirot's gaze softened, but only for a moment. The phone call, he said, that summoned Dr. Shepherd back to Fernley Park, it was not made by Parker, as we first thought. No, it was made by someone else, someone who needed Dr. Shepherd to find the body, to set the stage. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, and I forced myself to meet Poirot's gaze. You're not suggesting I made the call, are you? I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Poirot tilted his head. Did I say that, mon ami? No, I say only that the call was made at your request. A steward from a ship perhaps paid to make the call. We have the telegram to prove it. My blood ran cold. The telegram, I had thought it untraceable, a simple transaction with a man I'd never see again. But Poirot had found it, as he found everything. The letter, Poirot said, his voice rising, from Mrs. Ferrars. It spoke of a blackmailer, someone who tormented her, who drove her to her death. Ackroyd knew this secret, and so he had to die. But who was the blackmailer? Who stood to gain from his silence? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Mrs. Ackroyd whimpered. Raymond's face was pale, and Ursula's eyes were fixed on the floor. I could feel the weight of Poirot's words, each one a step closer to the truth. The killer, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a whisper, is clever. Clever enough to manipulate time, to stage a murder, to plant clues. But the killer did not count on Hercule Poirot. The killer did not count on the chair. He turned, pointing to the corner where the chair stood. This chair. It was moved to hide the dictaphone's removal, but it was also moved to hide something else, something the killer could not afford to be seen. In the killer's haste, they left a trace of their presence, their plan, their guilt. I could stand it no longer. Poirot, I said, my voice sharp, you're spinning a story, but you have no proof. You can't accuse someone based on a chair and a few footprints. He turned to me, his eyes like daggers. Proof, Dr. Shepherd. Oh, I have proof. The proof is in your bag, in your movements, in the lies you have told. The proof is in the truth you hide. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. I could feel the eyes of the household on me, their suspicion growing. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Tonight, Madame et Messieurs, all will be clear. The killer will be revealed and the truth will shine like a beacon. He paused, his gaze locked on mine. And Dr. Shepherd, he said softly, I invite you to stay until the end. I nodded, my mouth dry, my mind a whirlwind of fear and calculation. The chair, the dictaphone, the phone call. Poirot had seen through it all, but I would not give in. Not yet. I had one last card to play, one last chance to turn the tide. The evening stretched on, Poirot laying out his case with relentless precision. He spoke of the letter, the blackmail, the motives of each person in the room. Mrs. Ackroyd's debts, Flora's inheritance, Blunt's love, Raymond's charm, Ursula's secret marriage, all were examined, dissected, laid bare. But always, his eyes returned to me, as if he could see the truth written on my soul. As the clock struck 10, Poirot clapped his hands, startling the room. Enough, he said. The time for games is over. Tonight, the killer will be named, and the chair, Ms. Amos, the chair will have its say. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the arms of my chair, as Poirot began to speak. The truth was coming, and I could do nothing to stop it. The satisfying end of this chapter came as Poirot's promise of revelation hung in the air. The tension palpable, the household on edge, and the listener left breathless, anticipating the dramatic unmasking to come. Chapter 9. Poirot's revelation. The drawing room at Fernley Park was a tableau of tension, the air thick with anticipation as the household gathered at Hercule Poirot's request. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn against the evening chill, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany furniture. Dr. James Shepherd stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of practiced calm. His eyes, however, flickered with a restlessness that belied his outward composure. The others, Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, Flora Ackroyd, Major Hector Blunt, Geoffrey Raymond, and Ursula Bourne sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from wary to openly anxious. Parker, the butler, hovered near the door, his usual deference tinged with unease. Caroline Shepherd, uninvited but present through sheer force of will, perched on a chair in the corner, her sharp eyes darting from face to face. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, fastidious figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His mustache was impeccably groomed, his eyes bright and piercing as they swept over the assembly. He held a small notebook in one hand, its pages filled with meticulous notes written in his precise slanting script. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of a chair as someone shifted uncomfortably. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, "we are here to unravel the truth behind the tragic death of Monsieur Roger Ackroyd, a man of wealth, of influence, yet a man who met his end in a most brutal fashion, stabbed in his own study, his secrets laid bare by a letter he never finished reading. Tonight, I shall reveal the identity of his murderer." A murmur rippled through the room. Flora's hands tightened on her handkerchief, her face pale but resolute. Mrs. Ackroyd's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing as if bracing for an accusation. Blunt sat rigidly, his jaw set, while Raymond leaned forward, his usual charm replaced by a guarded intensity. Ursula, her dark hair pulled back severely, stared at Poirot with a mixture of defiance and fear. Shepherd's fingers twitched behind his back, but his expression remained impassive. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let us begin with the facts, Ms. Amos. Monsieur Ackroyd was found dead at approximately 10 o'clock on the night of his murder, a dagger in his neck, in his locked study. A phone call, received by Dr. Shepherd, summoned him back to Fernley Park, where he discovered the body. The window was open, footprints led to it, and a chair was curiously out of place. A dictaphone, a letter, a goose quill. These are the threads of our tapestry. But first, we must examine the alibis, for it is in the alibis that the truth begins to emerge." He turned to Flora, his gaze softening slightly. "Mademoiselle Ackroyd, you claimed to have been in your room, reading, at the time of the murder, yet you were seen by Parker near the study door earlier that evening. Why were you there?" Flora's cheeks flushed, but her voice was steady. "I was worried about Uncle Roger. He seemed so distressed at dinner, talking about that letter from Mrs. Ferrars. I thought he might need me, so I went to check on him. But I didn't go in. I heard him talking, so I left." "Talking?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "To whom?" "I don't know," Flora stammered. "I thought he was on the telephone. Perhaps I didn't stay to listen." Poirot nodded, jotting a note in his book. "Very well, and you, Major Blunt?" He turned to the tall, weathered man, whose face betrayed little emotion. "You were in the billiard room, you say, alone. A convenient place, Nan, no one to confirm your presence." Blunt's eyes met Poirot's without flinching. "I was there. I don't care for company when I'm thinking. If you're suggesting I had something to do with Roger's death, you're barking up the wrong tree." Poirot smiled faintly, undeterred. "And you, Monsieur Raymond, the charming secretary, always so helpful. You were in your room, writing letters, yet no one saw you enter or leave." Raymond's smile was tight. "I'm a private sort. When I work, I was catching up on correspondence. Roger gave me the night off after dinner." Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Ackroyd, whose fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. "Madame, you were in the drawing room, knitting. A peaceful activity, yet your debts, they weigh heavily, do they not? Monsieur Ackroyd's death has secured your financial position, has it not?" Mrs. Ackroyd's face reddened. "How dared you? I loved my brother-in-law. I would never." "Enough," Poirot interrupted gently but firmly. "And Mademoiselle Bourne, the parlour-maid with a secret. You were married to Ralph Peyton, a fact you concealed." "Why?" Ursula's chin lifted, her eyes blazing. "Because Ralph asked me to. He didn't want Roger to know until he could prove himself independent. I loved him. I'd never hurt Roger. He was kind to me." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you, Dr. Shepherd," he said, turning to the man by the fireplace. "You were called away after dinner, only to return upon receiving a mysterious phone call. A call, I might add, that no one at Fernley Park admits to making." Shepherd's smile was thin. "I've told you everything, Poirot. I got the call, came back, and found Roger dead. I've been nothing but cooperative." "Cooperative," Poirot said, his tone laced with irony. "But let us examine the evidence more closely. The footprints, for instance. They matched shoes belonging to Ralph Peyton, found at the Three Boars Inn. Convenient. Stepson, missing, presumed guilty. Yet Ralph was in Liverpool, hiding not at Fernley Park. Someone placed those shoes to mislead us." A gasp escaped Flora. "You mean Ralph's innocent?" "Mais oui," Poirot said. "Ralph Peyton did not kill Roger Ackroyd, nor did Mademoiselle Bourne, whose loyalty to him is genuine. The footprints were a deception, as was the open window. The killer wished us to believe an outsider committed the crime." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Then there is the dictaphone, a most ingenious device. It played Monsieur Ackroyd's voice, creating the illusion he was alive at 9:30, when in fact he was already dead. The chair, moved to conceal the dictaphone's removal, was another clue. And the letter from Mrs. Ferrars revealing it. Blackmailer burned, but not before Ackroyd read enough to know he was betrayed." Poirot stopped, his eyes sweeping the room. The killer is among us, someone who knew Ackroyd's habits, who had access to the study, who could manipulate the dictaphone and place the footprints, someone who stood to gain from Ackroyd's silence. The room was silent, every eye fixed on Poirot Shepherd's, hands unclenched, then clenched again, his knuckles white. Caroline leaned forward, her breath catching. "Let us consider the phone call," Poirot continued. "A steward from a ship, paid to make it, traced back to a request from King's Abbot, and the black medical bag so conveniently placed to carry a dictaphone. Dr. Shepherd, you were at the Three Boars earlier that evening, were you not? Near Ralph's shoes. And your bag, did it not contain the dictaphone when you returned to Fernley Park?" Shepherd's face paled, but his voice was steady. "You're grasping at straws, Poirot. I'm a doctor, not a murderer." Poirot's smile was almost pitying. "You are a doctor, a man trusted, respected, a man who could move freely, unnoticed, a man who knew Mrs. Ferrers's secret that she poisoned her husband, a man who blackmailed her, driving her to despair. And when she wrote to Ackroyd revealing your name, you had no choice. You killed him to protect your secret." A collective gasp filled the room. Flora's hands flew to her mouth. Mrs. Ackroyd's handkerchief fell to the floor. Blunt's fists clenched, and Raymond's jaw dropped. Ursula's eyes widened, but she remained silent. Caroline stared at her brother, her face a mask of disbelief. Shepherd laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "This is absurd. You have no proof, no proof." Poirot's voice was sharp. "The dictaphone, monsieur, was in your bag. The phone call, arranged by you. The footprints, placed by you. You were at Fernley Park at the time of the murder, not after. You stabbed Ackroyd, set the dictaphone to play, and left, only to return as the innocent discoverer of the body. Your narration, so carefully crafted, omitted the truth that you are the blackmailer, the murderer." Shepherd's composure cracked, his eyes darting to the door. "You can't prove any of this," he said, but his voice trembled. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze unrelenting. "I can, and I have. The steward has confessed. The dictaphone's timer matches your movements, and your own words, monsieur, betray you. You wrote of the murder night with such detail, yet you omitted your presence in the study before the phone call. Why? Because you were there, killing Ackroyd." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Shepherd's shoulders sagged, his face a mask of defeat. "You're clever, Poirot," he whispered to Clever. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "You had a choice, monsieur. You chose greed, then murder. The little grey cells, they do not lie." Caroline let out a choked sob, her hands covering her face. Flora reached for her, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Ackroyd sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Blunt and Raymond exchanged stunned glances, while Ursula clutched the arm of her chair, her face pale but resolute. Poirot turned to the group, his voice gentle now. "The truth is painful, but it is necessary. Monsieur Ackroyd's killer is Dr. James Shepherd. The case is closed." Shepherd said nothing, his silence louder than any confession. He stood, his eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the room. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across his face. The household sat in stunned silence, grappling with the revelation that the trusted doctor, the narrator of their story, was the architect of their tragedy. Poirot closed his notebook with a soft snap. "I bid you good night," he said, bowing slightly. "The truth is revealed, and justice will follow." As he left the room, the weight of his words lingered, a heavy curtain falling on the drama of Fernley Park. Shepherd remained by the fireplace, alone with his guilt, as the others began to disperse, their lives forever altered by the truth. The village of King's Abbot would talk of this night for years to come, the night Hercule Poirot unmasked a murderer in their midst. But for now, the drawing room was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock, marking the end of a chapter and the beginning of reckoning. The air in Fernley Park seemed to grow heavier as the minutes ticked by, the shock of Poirot's revelation settling like dust over the gathered company. No one moved at first, as if frozen by the weight of the truth. Dr. Shepherd stood by the fireplace, his silhouette stark against the flickering flames, his hands now limp at his sides. His face, once so composed, was a study in defiance, part resignation, as if he were wrestling with the inevitability of his exposure. Caroline was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling but sharp. "James, tell me it isn't true. Tell me he's wrong." Her eyes, usually so keen and gossipy, were wide with a mixture of horror and pleading. She leaned forward in her chair, her knitting abandoned on her lap, her hands clasped tightly, as if to anchor herself against the storm of Poirot's words. Shepherd turned to her, his expression softening for a moment. "Caroline," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that seemed to crush the air from the room. Caroline's face crumpled and she buried it in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Flora, still clutching her handkerchief, rose and crossed to Caroline, kneeling beside her. "Miss Shepherd, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I trusted him. We all did." Her eyes darted to Shepherd, a flicker of betrayal crossing her delicate features. Mrs. Ackroyd, her composure fraying, stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "How could you, James?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Roger trusted you. We all trusted you. And you betrayed us all." Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl, her eyes blazing with indignation. Major Blunt, ever reserved, cleared his throat, his voice low but steady. "This is a damned mess," he said, his gaze fixed on Shepherd. "You sat with us, listened to us, all the while knowing what you've done. Why, man, why?" Shepherd's lips twitched, but no answer came. He looked at Poirot, who stood near the door, watching the scene with an air of detached sorrow. "You've won, Poirot," Shepherd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've unraveled it all." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "It is not a victory, Monsieur Shepherd. It is merely the truth. The little grey cells, they demand it." Geoffrey Raymond, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice tight with disbelief. "You were blackmailing Mrs. Ferrars, and when she threatened to expose you, you killed Roger to keep it quiet. My God, Shepherd, how did it come to this?" Shepherd's eyes flickered to Raymond, then away, settling on the fire. "It wasn't meant to go this far," he said, his voice hollow. "It started small, a suggestion, a way to ease my debts. Mrs. Ferrars was desperate, and I saw an opportunity. But when she wrote to Roger, when he started asking questions, I panicked. I couldn't let it all come out." Ursula, who had remained silent, stood now, her face pale but composed. "You used Ralph," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You framed him, knowing he was innocent, knowing I loved him." Shepherd met her gaze, and for a moment, regret flashed across his face. "I didn't want to hurt you, Ursula, or Ralph, but I was trapped. Once it started, there was no going back." Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding silence once more. "Monsieur Shepherd, you speak of being trapped, but it was a trap of your own making. You chose to blackmail, to deceive, to kill. The dictaphone, the footprints, the phone call were your tools, carefully arranged to mislead. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot." He turned to the others, his voice softening. "You must understand, Miss Amos, that the doctor's actions were driven by fear and greed, but also by cunning." He narrated this tale, guiding us through his eyes, yet he omitted the most crucial detail, his own guilt. The manuscript he wrote, it was his confession, though he did not intend it to be so. Caroline's head snapped up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Manuscript? James, what is he talking about?" Shepherd's shoulders slumped further, as if the weight of Poirot's words had finally broken him. "I wrote it all down," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Every detail, every moment. I thought I could control the story, make it mine, but Poirot, he saw through it." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "The manuscript, it is a remarkable document, a murderer's account, disguised as a witness's tale. But the clues were there, in what you did not say, in the gaps you left. The chair moved to hide the dictaphone's removal, the phone call, arranged to establish your alibi, the shoes stolen from Ralph Payton to cast suspicion, and the letter burned to conceal your name as the blackmailer." Flora's voice broke through, trembling but firm. "Why didn't you stop, Dr. Shepherd? Why didn't you confess before it came to this?" Shepherd's gaze dropped to the floor, his voice a whisper. "I couldn't. Once I started, it was like a machine I couldn't stop. Mrs. Ferrars' death, Roger's suspicions, it all spiraled. I thought I could outsmart everyone, even Poirot." Poirot's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "Many have tried, monsieur, but the truth, it is relentless." The room fell silent again, the weight of Shepherd's confession settling over them like a shroud. Parker, still by the door, shifted uncomfortably, his usual impassivity replaced by a flicker of unease. Mrs. Ackroyd sank back into her chair, her anger giving way to exhaustion. Blunt stared at the floor, his hands clenched, while Raymond shook his head, as if trying to dispel the reality of what he'd heard. Caroline stood, her movements slow, as if every step cost her. She crossed to her brother, her face a mask of grief. "James," she said, her voice breaking, "how could you do this to us, to me?" Shepherd looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never meant to hurt you, Caroline. You were the one thing I wanted to protect. That's why I'll end it my way." Poirot's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Monsieur Shepherd, what do you mean?" Shepherd's smile was faint, almost serene. "You'll see, Poirot, you've won, but I'll choose my exit." Before anyone could react, Shepherd turned and walked toward the door, his steps deliberate. Parker moved to stop him, but Poirot raised a hand, his expression unreadable. "Let him go," he said softly. "The truth is out. His fate is his own now." Shepherd paused at the threshold, looking back at the room. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The room erupted into chaos. Flora sobbed, clinging to Ursula, who stood rigid, her face pale. Mrs. Ackroyd began to wail, her cries sharp and piercing. Blunt stood, his hands flexing as if he wanted to chase after Shepherd, but he remained rooted to the spot. Raymond ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. Caroline collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Poirot remained calm, his eyes following the path Shepard had taken. "It is finished," he said quietly. "The murderer is unmasked, and the truth is known. But the cost, Mies Amos, the cost is great." He turned to Caroline, his voice gentle. "Mademoiselle Shepard, your brother's actions were his own, but his love for you was real. He wished to spare you the pain of a trial, of public disgrace. That is why I delayed, why I gathered you all here tonight, to give him a chance to choose his path." Caroline looked up, her face streaked with tears. "You knew, all along. You knew." Poirot inclined his head. "From the moment I saw the chair, misplaced in the study. From the moment I heard of the dictaphone, the footprints, the phone call, the little gray cells, they do not rest. But I wished to be certain, to give him the chance to confess." Flora's voice was small, almost lost in the room's tension. "What happens now, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Now you heal. Ralph Peyton is free, his name cleared. Ursula, you may be with him, unburdened by suspicion. The household of Fernley Park will mourn, but it will survive. And Dr. Shepard, he will face his justice, in his own way." The clock on the mantel chimed, its soft notes cutting through the silence. Poirot adjusted his coat, his movements precise and deliberate. "I shall take my leave," he said. "My work here is done. But I leave you with this. The truth, though painful, sets us free. Cherish it, and guard it well." He bowed, a small, formal gesture, and walked to the door. Parker opened it for him, his face pale but composed. As Poirot stepped into the hall, the firelight caught his silhouette, casting a long shadow that seemed to linger even after he was gone. Chapter 10. Apologio d'Art. James Shepard sat alone in his study, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. The manuscript before him, a meticulous record of the events surrounding Roger Ackroyd's murder, was nearly complete. His pen scratched against the paper, each word a confession, a release, and a reckoning. The village of King's Abbot, with its quaint cottages and whispering gossips, seemed a world away now, though it was only steps beyond his door. This was his final act, his apologia, not to the world but to himself and, perhaps, to the one man who had seen through him from the start. Hercule Poirot. The weight of his actions pressed against him, heavier now than ever. He had always prided himself on his cleverness, his ability to navigate the small, predictable world of King's Abbot with ease. As a doctor he was trusted, respected, a pillar of the community. But beneath that veneer lay a man driven by desperation, by greed, by a need to control the chaos that life had thrown at him. The blackmail of Mrs. Ferrars had been his first step into the abyss, a calculated move born of opportunity. Her husband's death, whispered to be her doing, had been the perfect leverage, a few carefully worded letters, a demand for payment, and she had complied, her fear of exposure outweighing her guilt. For months, the money had flowed, a quiet stream that kept Shepard's own financial troubles at bay. But Roger Ackroyd had changed everything. The man's wealth, his influence, his very existence had become a threat when Mrs. Ferrars, in her final act of desperation, confessed her secret to him. She had written a letter, naming Shepard as her blackmailer, and Ackroyd, upright and unforgiving, would not let such a betrayal stand. Shepard remembered the dinner at Fernley Park, the weight of Ackroyd's gaze as he spoke of the letter, his voice heavy with disappointment. She named her tormentor, Ackroyd had said, his eyes narrowing. "I'll deal with it tomorrow." Tomorrow, Shepard knew, would mean ruin, exposure, disgrace. The end of everything he had built. The decision to kill Ackroyd had not come lightly, but it had come quickly. Shepard was no stranger to death. As a doctor he had seen it in all its forms, slow, painful, sudden. But to cause it, to wield that power, was something else entirely. The plan had formed in his mind with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified him. The dictaphone, a curious device he had acquired out of fascination with modern technology, became the cornerstone of his scheme. He had recorded Ackroyd's voice during a casual conversation weeks earlier, a mundane discussion about estate matters. With a timer rigged to the device, he could create the illusion that Ackroyd was alive long after the deed was done. That night, after leaving Fernley Park, Shepard had returned under the cover of darkness. The window to Ackroyd's study was unlatched, a detail he had noted during his visit. The dagger, a ceremonial piece from Ackroyd's own collection, was sharp and heavy in his hand. The act itself was swift, almost dreamlike. Ackroyd had barely looked up from his desk before the blade found its mark, a single thrust to the neck. The man slumped forward, blood pooling on the blotter, his eyes wide with shock. Shepard had stood there for a moment, heart pounding, the reality of what he had done sinking in. But there was no time for hesitation. He moved the chair to obscure the dictaphone's hiding place, planted Ralph Peyton's shoes to create misleading footprints, and slipped out through the window. The phone call was his masterstrug. He had arranged for a steward on a passing ship to call Fernley Park, claiming an urgent message for Dr. Shepard. The call would bring him back to the scene, establishing his presence as a concerned doctor rather than a murderer. Parker, the butler, had played his part unwittingly, confirming Shepard's arrival after the supposed time of death. The dictaphone, set to play Ackroyd's recorded voice, had convinced Parker that his master was alive when Shepard left the first time. It was a perfect alibi, or so he had thought. But Hercule Poirot was no ordinary man. From the moment the little Belgian had stepped into the case, Shepard had felt the ground shifting beneath him. Poirot's questions, his seemingly idle observations, had a way of cutting through the fog of deception. The moved chair, the footprints, the dictaphone in Shepard's medical baggage clue had been a thread that Poirot tugged, unraveling Shepard's carefully woven lies. The detective's insistence on the little grey cells was no mere quirk. It was a warning, a reminder that no detail was too small to escape his notice. Shepard paused in his writing, the pen hovering above the page. He remembered the household, gathering the moment Poirot had called them all together to reveal the truth. The room had been thick with tension, every face a mask of fear or suspicion. Flora, pale and defiant, still clung to the hope of Ralph's innocence. Mrs. Ackroyd, clutching her shawl, had muttered about her financial woes. Major Blunt, silent and stoic, had watched Poirot with a mix of admiration and dread. And Raymond, the secretary, had tried to charm his way through the interrogation, only to falter under Poirot's relentless logic. Poirot had begun slowly, dismantling alibis with the precision of a surgeon. He explained how Ralph Peyton, though initially a suspect, could not have committed the murder. His shoes were stolen, his movements accounted for in Liverpool. Ursula Bourne, the parlour-maid, was revealed as Ralph's secret wife, her loyalty to him unwavering. The footprints, the dictaphone, the mysterious phone call pointed to a killer who knew Ackroyd's household intimately, someone who could move freely without arousing suspicion. And then, with a calm that chilled the room, Poirot had turned to Shepard. "You, my friend," Poirot had said, his eyes locking onto Shepard's, "are the one we seek." The accusation had hit like a thunderbolt. Shepard had sat frozen, his mind racing for an escape, but there was none. Poirot laid out the evidence with devastating clarity, the dictaphone found in Shepard's bag, the phone call traced to his request, the inconsistencies in his timeline. The household had gasped, their eyes turning to Shepard with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Caroline, his sister, had been mercifully absent, spared the sight of her brother's unmasking, but Shepard knew the truth would reach her eventually, and that knowledge was a wound deeper than any other. Now, in the solitude of his study, Shepard wrote to explain himself, not to justify, but to understand. He had blackmailed Mrs. F out of necessity, or so he told himself. His practice was struggling, his debts mounting, and the allure of easy money had been too strong. Ackroyd's murder was not planned, but inevitable, a desperate act to protect his secret. He had underestimated Poirot, believing the detective's retirement had dulled his edge. Instead, Poirot had seen through him from the start, playing a subtle game to give Shepard a chance to confess privately. Poirot's final act of mercy had been to delay the public revelation. "For your sister's sake," he had said quietly, after the others had left, "write your truth, Doctor, and end this as you see fit." It was a kindness Shepard did not deserve, yet one he clung to. Caroline, with her sharp tongue and endless curiosity, would be devastated by his disgrace. By ending his life, Shepard could shield her from the worst of it, letting her believe he had fallen to some private despair rather than public shame. The manuscript grew, page after page, as Shepard recounted every detail. He described the moment he had first conceived the blackmail scheme, the thrill of power it gave him. He wrote of Mrs. Ferrer's letters, her growing desperation, and the moment she had confided in Ackroyd. He detailed the murder night, the careful staging, the calculated risks. He admitted his admiration for Poirot, the man who had outwitted him at every turn. The detective's ability to piece together the truth from fragments of chair, the footprints, the dictaphone was nothing short of genius. As the hours passed, Shepard's writing became more introspective. He wondered where it had all gone wrong. Was it the first letter to Mrs. Ferrers, the moment he had crossed into darkness? Or was it earlier, in the quiet compromises of his life, the slow erosion of his morals? He thought of Caroline, her endless gossip, a shield against the loneliness of their small world. He thought of Ackroyd, a man who had trusted him, and of Mrs. Ferrers, whose guilt he had exploited. Each memory was a weight, pulling him toward the inevitable. The pen slowed, the words coming harder now. Shepard described his final meeting with Poirot, the detective's quiet insistence that he confess. "The truth," Dr. Poirot had said, "is a burden you cannot carry forever." And so, Shepard wrote, not for forgiveness but for clarity. He would leave this manuscript for Poirot, a testament to the detective's victory and his own defeat. He would take the veronal, a doctor's poison, and let the world move on without him. The lamp flickered, the shadows dancing across the room. Shepard set down his pen, the manuscript complete. 10,000 words, give or take. A life distilled into ink and paper. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his confession lifting, if only slightly. King's Abbot would wake tomorrow to whispers of his death, and Caroline would mourn, never knowing the full truth. Poirot, he knew, would read the manuscript, and nod, satisfied that justice had been served in its own quiet way.